It's easy to rule the world when you believe you own it. But even kings flinch when ghosts of the past knock on the door. And for Dominic Ashford, that knock came disguised as a will, a document that would unravel his empire thread by thread. He laughed when his ex-wife showed up in the will until the lawyer revealed a terrifying detail. The sunlit skyline of Miami, Florida, shimmered like a mirage in the late afternoon. Heat radiated through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office. Dominic Ashford surveyed his domain with the cold, calculating gaze of a man who had long mastered the art of control. The port of Miami sprawled beneath him, a maze of cranes and containers that spoke of power, commerce, and the ruthless precision that had become his signature. Dominic's fingers tapped in impatient rhythm against the polished walnut of his desk. At 47, he was a commanding presence, salt and pepper hair meticulously styled, and his tailored Armani suit a clear reflection of the wealth he had fought to claim. Every inch of him radiated the confidence of someone who had clawed his way to the top and had no intention of letting go. "Mr. Ashford," came his assistant's voice crackling through the intercom. "Your 4 o'clock is here?" A faint smirk tugged at Dominic's lips. "Send him in, Natalie." The door swung open to reveal a nervous man in his 30s. Dominic didn't rise. Instead, he gestured lazily toward the chair opposite him. "Mr. Morales." Dominic's voice was smooth, but a distinct steel lay beneath the silk. "I trust you've brought good news." Gabriel Morales swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. "Mr. Ashford, we've hit a few snags with the zoning board. They're pushing back environmental concerns." "Snags?" Dominic cut in, his tone sharpening. "I don't pay you for snags, Gabriel. I pay you for solutions. Sir, if we just had a little more time?" Dominic rose to his full 6'3" height, towering over the desk. "Time is money, and money is something I have plenty of. What I don't have is patience for incompetence." Gabriel's face went pale. "Mr. Ashford, please." "You have 48 hours, Dominic said flatly, cutting him off. 48 hours to make the zoning issue disappear, or I'll find someone who can. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir," Gabriel stammered, pushing himself up on unsteady legs. "Good." Dominic's smile was hollow, his eyes cold. "Don't let me keep you." As the door closed behind Gabriel's retreating figure, Dominic allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. This was his world. The pressure, the stakes, the silent wars fought across boardrooms. Fortunes were built and destroyed with a handshake or the falter of a man's resolve. The intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Ashford, your wife is on line 1. "Line 1? Natalie's voice echoed through the intercom again. "It's your wife, Mr. Ashford." Dominic's expression softened ever so slightly. "Put her through, Natalie." "Darling," Bianca's voice purred through the speaker, smooth and honeyed. "Don't forget the charity galas tonight at the Coral Bay Conservatory. Car picks us up at 7. "Of course," Dominic replied, his tone warming. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." "Perfect. Oh, and Dominic, wear the patch Felipe tie I gave you for Christmas. It'll look amazing with my new Valentino." "As you wish," he chuckled. "See you at home, love." As the call ended, Dominic's gaze wandered to the collection of framed photos on his desk. Bianca featured in nearly all of them. Bianca dazzling at the Venice Film Festival in a shimmering gown, Bianca lounging on their yacht off the Amalfi Coast, Bianca on their wedding day 2 years ago, triumphant in silk and diamonds. But tucked behind the latest photo was one that stood out, a little older, worn at the edges. Dominic hesitated before pulling it forward. It was him, years younger, arm draped around a woman with kind brown eyes and a soft smile. Elena, his first wife. The woman he'd left behind in his climb to power. For a moment, a flicker of something, maybe guilt, maybe regret, moved across his face. But just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by the cool detachment he'd long since perfected. He slid the photo back into the shadows where it had remained, a relic of a life he had buried long ago. Now, he had everything. Wealth, power. A trophy wife who understood the unspoken rules of their world. As if to solidify that thought, Dominic moved to the window, eyes sweeping across his empire. The sun was dipping low, painting Miami in brilliant strokes of orange and pink. Below, the city shimmered with potential and profit. His phone buzzed. A message from his broker lit up the screen. Ashford Maritime up 3%. Expected to surge with Q3 earnings. Dominic smirked. This was his kingdom now. A world of profit margins, power plays, and clean exits. a world where sentiment had no seat at the table and the past stayed buried. As night descended on Miami, Dominic Ashford left his office, confident he stood unshakable at the pinnacle of power. He didn't know fate had other plans. Across the city, in a modest apartment overlooking the industrial stretch of South Beach, Elena Ramirez sat at her small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of cooling coffee. Time had not been kind. Worry lined her once youthful face, and her clothes bore the quiet signs of someone who dressed for function, not flair. She stared at the envelope in front of her, crisp, official, embossed with the logo of a law firm that did not belong in her world. With shaking hands, she opened it for what must have been the 100th time and read again the words that had turned her world inside out. Dear Miss Ramirez, we regret to inform you of the passing of Mr. Harrison Bellamy. As per his last will and testament, your presence is requested at the reading of the will. Elena's mind spun. Harrison Bellamy, a name she hadn't heard in years, a man she'd never even met. Yet here was this letter, summoning her to the reading of his will. It made no sense. She glanced at the clock. In less than 24 hours, she would be sitting in a law office, surrounded by the kind of wealth and power she had walked away from, when Dominic cast her aside. The thought turned her stomach. With a sigh, Elena stood and moved to the window. The lights of South Beach flickered in the distance, a far cry from the lavish oceanfront view she once shared with Dominic in his penthouse. For a moment, she let herself drift back. Parties that stretched into morning, yacht vacations along the Mediterranean, the false sense of safety she had once believed was unbreakable. But that was before Dominic showed his true colors, before he exchanged her for a younger, glossier version, before he left her with shattered dreams and a heart caked in bitterness. Her reflection stared back from the glass. Older, yes, but not broken. Elena straightened her shoulders. Whatever this reading was about, she would face it with grace. She had rebuilt herself once. She could weather whatever came next. Little did she know, across town in his sprawling Biscayne Bay mansion, Dominic Ashford was receiving the exact same summons. The charity gala at the Coral Bay Conservatory was in full swing. The great hall, usually brimming with marine installations, had been transformed into a glittering maze of champagne towers and designer couture. Dominic drifted through the crowd with the ease of a predator. Bianca clung to his arm. The picture-perfect partner. She leaned toward him, lips barely moving behind her poised smile. "The Martins are here," she whispered. "Why don't you work your magic while I speak with the board?" Dominic nodded, once again marveling at how well Bianca understood the dance. This wasn't merely a fundraiser. It was a chessboard, where alliances were traded, fortunes secured, and legacies carved. As he moved toward the Martins, his phone buzzed against his thigh. He smoothly excused himself and stepped aside to check the message. The text came from an unknown number. "Mr. Ashford, this is James Woodward from Woodward Price & Associates. I apologize for the short notice, but your attendance is required at our offices tomorrow at 2 p.m. for a meeting regarding the estate of the late Harrison Bellamy. Your presence is imperative for the reading of Mr. Bellamy's will." Dominic frowned, his thoughts kicking into high gear. Harrison Bellamy, the elusive billionaire who had quietly funded several of Dominic's earliest ventures. They hadn't spoken in years, and as far as Dominic knew, Bellamy had no heirs. A slow smile spread across his face as the implications took root. Bellamy had been worth billions. And if Dominic had been summoned to the will reading, he quickly typed a reply, confirming his attendance, then tucked the phone away and slipped back into the gala's polished rhythm, now re-energized. The night had suddenly transformed into a promise of greater heights. As the event dwindled in the early hours of morning, Dominic and Bianca stepped into their waiting limousine. Bianca sighed with relief as she kicked off her heels and curled into the soft leather seat. "Successful evening, I'd say," she purred, trailing her fingers along Dominic's thigh. "I saw you speaking with Senator Clark. Anything juicy?" Dominic smirked, pulling her closer. "Just setting up the next big play. But that's not even the most interesting part of the night." Bianca raised a perfectly shaped brow. "Oh, do tell." "I've been summoned to a will reading tomorrow, Harrison Bellamy's will." Her eyes widened. "Bellamy, the billionaire recluse? Darling, this could be massive." Dominic nodded, the glint of ambition sharp in his gaze. Indeed, he had no close family, no heirs. Given our past. You think he left everything to you? Bianca whispered, her excitement unmistakable. It's a strong possibility, Dominic said, allowing a rare flicker of unfiltered optimism. If it's true, we're not talking millions, we're talking billions. Enough to take Ashford Maritime global, to buy out our rivals, to rule the world, Bianca finished, her smile razor-edged. Dominic laughed, lifting his glass of champagne. To ruling the world, then. And to Harrison Bellamy, may he rest in peace and may his fortune rest with us. As the limousine glided through the quiet streets of Miami, Dominic Ashford basked in the heady rush of imminent triumph. He'd already claimed the city. With Bellamy's fortune, the world would follow. What he didn't know was that fate was already reshuffling the deck. The players had been placed. In less than 24 hours, in an unremarkable law office, the paths of Dominic Ashford and Elena Ramirez would cross again, with consequences neither of them could have imagined. As dawn painted the Miami sky in hues of pink and gold, two alarms blared in two very different corners of the city. In his Biscayne Bay mansion, Dominic Ashford stirred awake to the soft chime of his smartphone. He stretched slowly beneath a cascade of Egyptian cotton sheets. Beside him, Bianca shifted, her platinum hair fanned across the pillow like a silken halo. "Morning, darling," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "Ready for your big day?" Dominic smiled, already feeling the rush of adrenaline that always came with the promise of a new conquest. More than ready? By this time tomorrow, we could be celebrating the biggest move of our lives. Across town, in her modest apartment above a florist's shop in Little Havana, Elena Ramirez jolted awake to the blare of her alarm clock. For a moment, she was lost in that hazy space between dream and reality. She had forgotten about the summons, the will reading that now loomed large in her day. Then it hit her, and her stomach clenched, an uneasy blend of nerves and something she couldn't quite name. A feeling, a sense that today would change everything. As the morning unfolded, neither Dominic nor Elena had any idea they were set on a direct collision course. Dominic's day began with a power breakfast at his favorite oceanfront bistro. Over perfectly poached eggs and fresh squeezed orange juice, he held court with his most trusted circle, lawyers, advisors, and his inner executive team. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice commanding instant attention, "today could mark the beginning of a new chapter for Ashford Maritime. I've been called to the reading of Harrison Bellamy's will." A ripple of energy moved through the group. Everyone there understood the stakes. "If it goes the way we think," Dominic continued, "we move fast. I want acquisition plans drafted for our top 3 competitors. Start scouting expansion sites in Shanghai, Singapore, Hong Kong. We're taking this global." Heads nodded, phones and tablets came out. The machinery of empire shifted into motion. Dominic felt a surge of pride. This was what he had built, an operation on the verge of global dominance. And after today, nothing would stand in his way. Meanwhile, Elena stood before her small closet, scanning her modest wardrobe with careful eyes. What did one even wear to a stranger's will reading? Especially when that stranger might link her once again to the man who had wrecked her world? She finally chose a simple black dress. It struck the right balance. Graceful without pretense, respectful without effort. Her hands trembled slightly as she applied her makeup in the mirror. Elena couldn't help but remember the last time she had seen Dominic. It had been right here, in this very apartment. 5 years ago, he had come in person to deliver the divorce papers, his eyes cold and detached as he handed over the documents that would officially end their marriage. "It's for the best, Elena," he had said, voice matter of fact. "We both know this hasn't been working for a long time." She had wanted to scream, to demand how he could throw away 15 years of marriage so easily. But in the end, she'd simply signed the papers, her hand trembling so violently she could barely form her name. "Goodbye, Elena," Dominic had said as he turned to leave. "I wish you the best." And just like that, he was gone, taking with him not only their shared life, but every dream and plan they had once built together. In the years since, Elena had painstakingly rebuilt herself. New job, new friends, a new sense of purpose. But the wound Dominic left had never fully closed. Now, as she finished her makeup, Elena braced herself for the possibility of seeing him again. Whatever awaited at the will reading, she would face it with the dignity and grace she had fought hard to reclaim. As the scheduled hour approached, both Dominic and Elena made their way to the downtown Miami offices of Woodward Price and Associates. Dominic arrived first, stepping out of his chauffeured Bentley with the polished assurance of a man who always commanded the room. He adjusted his hermit tie and strode into the building, nodding briskly at the receptionist as he passed. In the elevator, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. Harrison Bellamy had been more than just a backer in his early career. He had been a mentor of sorts. A reclusive billionaire who had seen promise in the young and ruthless Dominic Ashford. Their partnership had been brief but defining, launching Dominic toward the empire he now presided over. And it seemed Bellamy's final move was to propel him even further. The thought brought a faint smile to his lips as the elevator opened into the law firm's opulent reception area. 10 minutes later, Elena arrived, her heart hammering as she stepped into the very same elevator. She gripped her purse tightly, trying to still the nerves rattling through her. What was she doing here? What could Harrison Bellamy, a man she'd never met, possibly want with her? As the elevator climbed, Elena drew in a steadying breath. Whatever lay beyond those doors, she would face it with the strength she had cultivated over the last 5 years. When the elevator opened, she stepped into a world she had once belonged to. A world of polished marble, curated art, and the faint scent of wealth and authority. For a brief second, the space pressed down on her, but she lifted her chin and crossed to the receptionist's desk. "Elena Ramirez," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm here for the reading of Harrison Bellamy's will." The receptionist nodded, her smile perfectly professional. "Of course, Miss Ramirez. They're expecting you in conference room A. Right this way." "This way, please," the receptionist said. As Elena followed her down the hallway, an unease settled in her chest. Each click of her modest heels against the marble floor echoed like a countdown to something far more significant than she could comprehend. At the end of the hall, the receptionist opened a large, dark wood door and stepped aside. "Mr. Woodward will be with you shortly," she said, before turning and disappearing down the corridor. Elena stepped inside and froze. At the far end of the long table, seated with all the calm command she remembered, was Dominic Ashford. Time seemed to pause. Dominic's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed as he registered the face of his ex-wife. Elena's heart pounded, a storm of old pain and new resentment rising fast. "Elena," Dominic said, his voice tight with a mix of disbelief and something else, maybe fatigue. "What are you doing here?" Before she could answer, the door opened again. A composed man in his 60s walked in, briefcase in hand. "Ah, Miss Ramirez, Mr. Ashford, thank you both for coming," he said smoothly. "I'm James Woodward." He gestured to the seat across from Dominic. Elena moved cautiously to sit, the charged silence between them thick as glass. "Now that you're both here, we can begin." Dominic's thoughts raced. Why was she here? This had to be an error. His eyes darted between Elena and the attorney, searching for clarity. "I'm sure you're wondering why you've been summoned." Woodward began, his tone serious. "As you know, Harrison Bellamy passed away 2 weeks ago." He paused, letting the weight of that statement land before continuing. "What you don't know is that, in his final days, Mr. Bellamy made several unexpected revisions to his will." Dominic leaned forward, the confidence he had carried all morning now visibly shaken. "What kind of revisions?" he asked sharply. Woodward cleared his throat. "Mr. Bellamy was a deeply private man, as you both know, but it appears he carried secrets even those closest to him never suspected." Then, turning to Elena, he asked calmly, "Miss Ramirez, did your mother ever mention a man named Harrison Bellamy?" Elena blinked, stunned by the question. "I don't think so. My mother passed when I was very young." "I don't remember her ever mentioning anyone by that name," Elena said quietly. Woodward nodded, as if that confirmed something he had already suspected. "Mr. Bellamy left behind a letter to be read at this meeting. I believe it will explain everything." He pulled an envelope from a folder, unfolded the paper inside, and began to read aloud. "To those gathered here today, if you're hearing this, then I've finally run out of time to make things right in person. I've lived a life filled with secrets and regrets, but none greater than the one I'm about to reveal. Elena Ramirez is my daughter." 35 years ago, I had a brief but powerful relationship with Elena's mother, Maria. When she told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I was focused on building my empire. The thought of a child, of responsibility, terrified me. So I ran. I told Maria I wanted nothing to do with her or the baby. I buried myself in my work, thinking I could forget. It was the greatest mistake of my life. By the time I understood what I had lost, it was too late. Maria had passed, and Elena was already grown. I watched from afar as she created her life, married, divorced. I convinced myself she was better off without me. But in these final days, I've come to see the cowardice in that reasoning. So now I'm doing what I should have done long ago, acknowledging my daughter and giving her what should have been hers from the start. To Elena, I know this must come as a shock. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I hope that in time, you'll understand. I leave you everything. My entire fortune, my companies, every asset. It's a poor stand-in for a lifetime of fatherhood, but it's all I have to give. To Dominic, you were like a son to me once. I saw in you the drive and ambition that mirrored my own youth. But I've also seen how that ambition hardened into something colder, more ruthless. I hope that in losing what you expected to gain today, you find your way back to the man I once believed you could become. I'm sorry for the pain this will cause, but the truth matters, even when it's late. Goodbye, and good luck to you both. As Woodward finished, silence settled like a weight over the room. Elena sat frozen, her mind spinning from the revelation. Across from her, Dominic's face had gone pale. His trademark confidence had crumbled into disbelief. Woodward cleared his throat gently. There's more, of course. Legal paperwork, financial records, deeds of property. But I think we could all use a moment to process this. Elena finally found her voice. First, this can't be real. There has to be some mistake. I assure you, Miss Ramirez, Woodward said gently, there is no mistake. Mr. Bellamy was very thorough. DNA tests confirming your relationship are included in the documentation. Dominic slammed his hand down on the table with such force that both Elena and Woodward jumped. This is insane, he snapped. Harrison was my mentor, my partner. He can't. I'm afraid he can, Woodward interrupted, his voice now firmer. And he has. As of this moment, all of Harrison Bellamy's assets, including his controlling shares in multiple enterprises, some of which I believe are tied to your own, now legally belong to Ms. Ramirez. The word struck Dominic like a punch to the chest. He turned toward Elena, his eyes ablaze with a mix of anger and disbelief. Elena, you don't know the first thing about running a business empire. This is madness. Elena held his gaze, her expression suddenly composed, resolute. You're right. I may not know much about business empires, Dominic, but I know betrayal, and I know justice. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the room, but none of them could foresee the storm this revelation was about to unleash. The reading of Harrison Bellamy's will was only the beginning, a spark destined to ignite a firestorm of revenge, redemption, and unexpected alliances within Miami's glittering elite. The tension was thick as James Woodward shuffled through the stack of documents in front of him. Elena sat upright in her chair, her posture rigid, her mind still reeling from the truth that Harrison Bellamy, a man she had never even known, was her father. Across from her, Dominic gripped the armrests of his chair, his face tight with fury, knuckles white. Now, Woodward resumed, his tone cautious, there are several other individuals named in Mr. Bellamy's will. They'll be joining us shortly. In the meantime, perhaps we can review some of the preliminary. The door burst open, interrupting him mid-sentence. Bianca Ashford strode into the room, her designer heels clicking sharply against the marble. She halted as her eyes fell on Elena, her flawless brows arching with visible surprise. What is she doing here? Bianca demanded, swinging her gaze toward Dominic. Her tone turned icy as she added, Darling, you didn't mention your ex-wife would be part of this circus. Proceeding, Dominic said tightly, rising to his feet. He placed a hand on Bianca's arm, a gesture equal parts possessive and restraining. I didn't know, he muttered through clenched teeth. Seems today is full of surprises. Elena watched the exchange, a mix of fascination and revulsion churning in her chest. She had never met Bianca in person, but the tabloids had made sure she recognized the woman who had replaced her. Seeing them now, Dominic, flawless in his tailored suit, and Bianca, in a gown that likely cost more than Elena's monthly salary, stirred a tide of memories she'd worked hard to bury. Sensing Elena's discomfort, Woodward cleared his throat. "Mrs. Ashford, thank you for joining us. We were just about to go over the key components of Mr. Bellamy's estate." "I'll stand, thank you," Bianca replied briskly, her voice like glass. She remained beside Dominic, her hand sliding onto his shoulder in silent claim. "Please continue," Dominic said, nodding. Woodward turned back to the stack of papers before him. "As I was saying, Mr. Bellamy's estate is quite vast. In addition to a personal fortune estimated at just over $4 billion, there are significant real estate assets, extensive art holdings, and, of course, various business interests." At the mention of business, Dominic leaned forward, eyes sharpening. "What exactly are we talking about here, James? Harrison was a silent partner in several of my ventures, but surely—" "I'm afraid it's more complicated than that, Mr. Ashford," Woodward interjected. "Mr. Bellamy maintained controlling interests in multiple entities, including a 51% stake in Ashford Maritime." The blood drained from Dominic's face. "That's not possible. I would have known." "The shares were acquired through a network of shell companies," Woodward explained. Mr. Bellamy was exceptionally discreet in his dealings. As Woodward continued outlining the scale of Bellamy's holdings, Elena's thoughts drifted back to the last time she'd seen Dominic before today. It had been at a charity gala nearly a year after their divorce. The ballroom of the Miami Bay Convention Center glittered beneath crystal chandeliers, jewels flashing on every neck and wrist. Elena stood alone near the bar, nursing a flute of champagne she could barely afford, swaddled in a rented gown that couldn't disguise how out of place she felt. She hadn't wanted to go, but her new supervisor had insisted. "It's good for business," he'd said. "You never know who you might meet." What he hadn't mentioned was the chance of running into her ex-husband. Dominic's laugh rose above the soft hum of conversation, drawing Elena's eyes across the ballroom. He stood at the center of a circle of admirers, his arm casually draped around a tall, elegant blonde, Bianca, of course. As if sensing her stare, Dominic looked up. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked across the crowd, and in his expression, Elena saw something, recognition, maybe even regret. But then Bianca leaned in, whispered something, and Dominic turned away. The moment slipped through her fingers. Elena placed her champagne flute on the bar and slipped from the room, tears threatening to spill. "Miss Ramirez, are you all right?" Woodward's voice cut through her reverie, snapping her back to the present. Everyone was watching her. Dominic with a mixture of frustration and disbelief, Bianca with cool disdain, and Woodward with genuine concern. "I'm fine," Elena replied, forcing a polite smile. "Please, go on." Woodward nodded and opened his mouth to continue, but the door opened again. This time, a small group entered. A stern-looking woman in her 50s, a younger man with a clear resemblance to Harrison Bellamy, and an elderly gentleman supported by a cane. "Ah," Woodward said, standing. "Allow me to introduce Margaret Bellamy, Harrison's sister, Thomas Bellamy, his nephew, and Harold Winters, his oldest friend and longtime business partner." As the newcomers took their seats, the energy in the room shifted. What had been a standoff between Dominic, Elena, and Bianca now transformed into something even more layered, a complex web of competing agendas and veiled hostility. Margaret Bellamy's gaze sharpened as she took in the room. "James," she said coldly, "I was told this would be a private family matter. Why are these people here?" Woodward cleared his throat. "I assure you, Mrs. Bellamy, everyone present has a legal interest in Mr. Bellamy's estate. If you'll allow me to explain." "Explain?" Thomas Bellamy cut in, his voice rising. "What's there to explain? Uncle Harrison told me that company would be mine one day. I've worked for him for years, prepared to take over. You can't tell me he changed his mind out of nowhere." As Thomas's protest echoed into silence, Harold Winters raised his hand. Though his voice wavered with age, it commanded instant respect. Now, let's all stay calm. I'm sure Harrison had his reasons for every decision he made." He turned to Woodward. "James, why don't you tell us exactly what those decisions were?" Woodward nodded with quiet gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Winters." "As I was explaining earlier," Woodward resumed, "Mr. Bellamy made substantial changes to his will in his final days. These changes primarily impacted the distribution of his estate and the control of his business holdings. He paused, scanning the room before his gaze settled on Elena. The majority of Mr. Bellamy's estate, including his controlling shares in several major corporations, has been left to his daughter, Elena Ramirez. The room erupted. Margaret Bellamy let out a choked cry of disbelief. Thomas jumped from his chair, his face flushed with fury. Bianca's grip on Dominic's shoulder tightened, her nails biting into his suit. "This is outrageous," Margaret shouted above the commotion. "Harrison didn't have a daughter. This woman is a fraud, a gold digger trying to take what rightfully belongs to our family." Elena flinched, the accusation slicing deep. But before she could respond, Harold Winters raised his voice once more. "Margaret, please, let's give James a chance to explain. I'm sure there's a reason behind all this." Woodward nodded gratefully toward the older man. "Indeed there is, Mr. Winters. Mr. Bellamy left a personal letter explaining the circumstances of his relationship with Ms. Ramirez's mother and why he chose to acknowledge her as his daughter after so many years. We also have DNA results confirming their biological connection." As Woodward spoke, Elena locked eyes with Dominic across the table. His face was unreadable, but she could see the wheels turning behind his eyes, calculating, reassessing, redefining everything. What this meant for him, for his company, for the empire he had built. For a moment, Elena was pulled backward in time, back to the beginning, when Dominic was still just a hungry young entrepreneur, grinding late nights to make Ashford Maritime a real name. "Are you sure about this?" Elena had asked him one night, concern in her voice. They were in their cramped apartment, papers scattered across the dining table that doubled as Dominic's workspace. He had looked up, eyes gleaming with ambition. "Of course I'm sure," he said. "This deal could put Ashford Maritime on the map. We'd finally have the chance to expand, take on major clients. But what if it fails?" she pressed. "We could lose everything." Dominic had risen, wrapped his arms around her, and held her close. "I know it's a risk," he'd whispered, "but if we don't take risks, we'll never get anywhere. Trust me, this is going to work. And when it does, we'll have everything we ever dreamed of." Elena had nodded, letting herself believe in the vision Dominic painted. She couldn't have known then how that ambition, so bold, so consuming, would one day overtake him. The sound of Thomas Bellamy's angry voice snapped her back to the present. "This is ridiculous," Thomas bellowed, rising again from his chair. "I don't care what some letter says. There's no way Uncle Harrison would leave everything to a complete stranger." "I assure you, Mr. Bellamy," Woodward replied, his voice firm and steady, "your uncle's wishes were unequivocally clear. While you and Mrs. Bellamy have both been provided for in the will, the majority of the estate, including control of Bellamy Enterprises, has been left to Ms. Ramirez." Dominic, who had remained uncharacteristically silent until now, finally spoke. "And what about Ashford Maritime?" he asked, voice low but sharp. "You said Harrison held a controlling interest." Woodward gave a solemn nod. "Yes, Mr. Ashford. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Bellamy's 51% stake in Ashford Maritime now belongs to Ms. Ramirez." The air thickened with the weight of that sentence. All eyes turned to Elena, some filled with disbelief, others with open resentment. From Dominic, there was something else entirely. A calculating stare that sent a chill down her spine. It was Bianca who broke the silence first. "This is absurd," she spat, her perfectly polished nails digging into Dominic's shoulder. "Darling, surely there's something we can do. This woman can't just walk in and take everything you've built." Dominic patted Bianca's hand, though his mind was clearly elsewhere. "James," he said, voice deceptively calm, "surely there's a way to challenge this. DNA test or not, the whole thing feels suspect." Woodward exhaled quietly. "You're welcome to pursue legal recourse, Mr. Ashford, but I must warn you, Mr. Bellamy's legal team was meticulous. The will is ironclad." As reality settled over the room like a heavy fog, it exploded once again into disorder. Margaret and Thomas huddled together in a furious whisper, throwing glances at Elena. Bianca began pacing the floor, phone already in hand, presumably speed-dialing their attorneys. Harold Winters remained still, his weathered face contemplative. And in the middle of it all sat Elena, barely able to process what had just happened. She was apparently now a billionaire, the majority shareholder in her ex-husband's corporation, the heir to a fortune and an empire she'd never asked for, and knew almost nothing about. As the room swirled with outrage and confusion, her gaze found Dominic once more. He was staring at her, an intensity in his eyes that caught her breath. And in that moment, Elena saw something unexpected. A flicker of the man she had once loved, the one who used to look at every disaster as a door waiting to be kicked open. But then Bianca leaned in again, whispering urgently into his ear. The moment vanished. Dominic's eyes turned cold, his face sharpening into the familiar mask of the ruthless businessman she had once known too well. Woodward raised his voice, attempting to cut through the uproar. "Please, everyone, if we could just remain calm." But his words were lost as the door burst open again. A young woman rushed in, cheeks flushed, breathing heavily. "I'm so sorry I'm late," she gasped. "Traffic was horrible, and then I couldn't find a place to park." She trailed off as her eyes swept the room, taking in the angry stares and tense silence. Did I miss something?" Woodward let out a weary sigh, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Ah, Miss Chang, thank you for coming. Everyone, this is Lily Chang, Mr. Bellamy's personal assistant for the past 5 years." Lily's eyes widened as she looked around at the chaos in the room. "Oh boy," she mumbled. "He really did it, didn't he?" That soft comment drew immediate attention. Margaret Bellamy snapped toward the younger woman, her eyes flashing. "What do you mean, he really did it? Did you know about this nonsense?" Lily raised her hands quickly. "I didn't know the specifics, I swear. Mr. Bellamy just said he was making big changes to his will, that he wanted to finally set things right. He seemed, I don't know, peaceful about it." As Lily spoke, Elena studied her closely. There was something in her posture, a mix of tension and quiet determination that hinted she might be holding back more than she was saying. Dominic seemed to notice it too. He stepped forward, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "Miss Chang, is it? I imagine you have some insight into Mr. Bellamy's frame of mind toward the end. Perhaps you can shed light on why he made such a sweeping decision?" Lily swallowed, glancing nervously from Dominic to Elena. I don't know if I should." "Oh, for heaven's sake," Margaret cut in sharply. "The girl obviously knows something. Out with it." Lily took a breath, then straightened her spine. "Bellamy talked a lot about regrets in his last few weeks. He kept looking at this old photograph of a woman holding a baby. He said he'd made a terrible mistake, that he had to fix it before it was too late." As Lily spoke, Elena felt her throat tighten. The photo? Could it have been her and her mother? Woodward cleared his throat. "Thank you, Miss Chang. That aligns with what Mr. Bellamy expressed in his letter. Now, if we could return to—" But Dominic wasn't finished. He turned toward Elena, his stare hard and direct. "Did you know about any of this?" he demanded. "How long have you been planning this little coup?" Elena met his gaze unflinching, her voice steady despite the burn of anger rising in her chest. "I had no idea, Dominic. Unlike some people, I don't spend my time scheming and manipulating." Bianca scoffed. Bianca let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Oh, please, you expect us to believe you just happened to wander in here today, completely unaware you were about to inherit billions. How convenient." Elena stood, her patience finally unraveling. "Believe whatever you want," she said, voice tight. "I came here because I received a letter, just like the rest of you. I had no idea who Harrison Bellamy was, let alone that he was my father, and I certainly didn't expect to walk into this circus." She turned to Woodward, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Woodward, I appreciate you informing me of the inheritance, but I think I need time to process all of this. Is there anything else I absolutely need to know right now? Or can I go?" Woodward gave her a sympathetic nod. "Of course, Miss Ramirez. There are a number of matters we'll need to review in detail, but they can wait. I'll have my assistant schedule a private meeting with you." As Elena began gathering her things, preparing to leave, Dominic stepped into her path. For a brief moment, they stood just inches apart, closer than they'd been in years. Elena could see the storm brewing in his eyes, anger, disbelief, and something else, something that looked almost like fear. "This isn't over, Elena," Dominic said, his voice low and intense. "You have no idea what you've just walked into. The business world. It isn't kind. It'll eat you alive." Elena didn't flinch. "Maybe so," she replied, "but I've survived worse." And with that, she brushed past him, walking out of the room with her head held high. As the door shut behind her, she leaned against the hallway wall, her legs momentarily weak. Everything hit her at once. Harrison Bellamy was her father. She was now a billionaire. She now held the majority stake in her ex-husband's corporation. As the implications of it all swirled in her mind, Elena stood straighter, a new, steely resolve rising within her. She hadn't asked for any of this, but now that it was hers, she wasn't going to back down. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever moves Dominic might make, she would be ready. Back in the conference room, the air was electric with tension. Dominic paced, eyes dark, his mind whirring. This couldn't be real. Everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed for, it was all slipping away. "Dominic," Bianca hissed, grabbing his arm. "We have to do something. Call the lawyers. Call someone, anyone, who can stop this insanity." He shook her off, irritated by the desperation in her voice. "Not now, Bianca. I need to think." As Dominic's thoughts spiraled, scenarios and counterplays spinning through his mind, he was pulled back to a defining moment in his past, one that had propelled him to where he stood now. 5 years earlier, Dominic had been seated in his downtown office, staring at a contract that could launch Ashford Maritime into the stratosphere. The deal would secure long-term shipping partnerships with some of the biggest corporations in the world. But there was a cost. His phone buzzed. "Elena. Hey, honey, just reminding you about dinner with my parents tonight. Mom's making your favorite roast chicken." Dominic's eyes flicked between the document on his desk and his phone screen. "Listen, Al," he said, voice tight. "Something's come up at the office. I don't think I'll make it." There was a pause. Again, her voice was soft, but the hurt was clear. "You promised." "This is the 3rd time this month, Dominic." He felt the weight of her disappointment, but he pushed it aside. "I know, I'm sorry, but this is important. I'll make it up to you. I promise." When the call ended, Dominic returned his focus to the contract. With a steady hand, he signed. That signature committed him to a world of compromises, bending rules, cutting corners, making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. It was the first of many decisions that slowly reshaped him into the ruthless executive he had become, far from the man Elena had once loved. "Mr. Ashford." Woodward's voice snapped Dominic out of the memory. "As I was saying, while Ms. Ramirez now holds the majority shares of Ashford Maritime, there are protocols in place to ensure a stable transition. You will retain your role as CEO, at least for now." Dominic's head jerked up. "At least for now? What's that supposed to mean?" Woodward shuffled through his papers. "As per Mr. Bellamy's final instructions, Ms. Ramirez is to be granted full access to all company records and operational decisions. She will have authority to review and, if needed, reverse any major executive actions." The room erupted once again. Margaret Bellamy shouted about legacy. Thomas raged, vowing to contest the will. Bianca was furiously barking into her phone, demanding immediate legal intervention. In the midst of the storm, Harold Winters motioned Dominic over with a solemn expression. "You're in a tight spot, son," he said quietly. "But don't act out of anger. Harrison always thought the world of you, even after you fell out." Dominic narrowed his eyes. "What exactly are you saying?" Harold sighed. "I'm saying he wouldn't have done this without a reason. Maybe, instead of fighting it, you should try to understand why." Before Dominic could respond, Lily Chang approached them, eyes wide with nerves. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "there's something else. Mr. Bellamy left a personal letter for you. She asked me to give this to you, after the will reading." Lily Chang held out a sealed envelope to Dominic. He took it, fingers trembling ever so slightly. What final message had Harrison Bellamy left for him? Guidance? An apology? Or perhaps one last lesson from the man who had once shaped his destiny? As Dominic stared at the envelope, the noise in the conference room faded into a distant blur. He barely registered Woodward's attempts to bring order, or Bianca tugging insistently at his sleeve. All that existed in that moment was the weight of the letter in his hand, and a sudden, suffocating sense that everything was about to change. He tightened his grip on the envelope, feeling its sharp edges press into his palm, small reminders that this wasn't just paper. It was memory. Judgment. A reckoning wrapped in cream-colored stationery. The confident, calculating voice in his head, the one that always mapped every outcome, had gone disturbingly silent. In its place was a quieter voice, one that hadn't spoken in years. Doubt. What if Harrison knew? About the deals? The betrayals, the lies layered so intricately over the years they felt indistinguishable from truth. And what if this letter was the final unmasking, an indictment, personal and scathing, from the only man whose opinion had ever mattered? Dominic Ashford, the man who had built his empire on foresight and ruthless precision, felt completely adrift. The meticulously controlled world he had spent decades crafting was slipping away. And for the first time in years, he didn't know what his next move would be. He slipped the letter into his pocket. His gaze wandered to the window. The sun was setting over Miami, the skyline awash in hues of burnt orange and dusky pink. It was the same view he had admired countless times from his penthouse, the view that had always symbolized power and limitless opportunity. But now, as darkness crept across the city, Dominic couldn't shake the sense that he was watching his reign dissolve, inch by inch. Dominic. Bianca's sharp voice finally cut through his thoughts. Are you even listening? We have to go. The legal team is waiting. He turned to look at her. There was panic in her eyes. Her flawless nails dug into her Chanel clutch with anxiety. And for the first time he saw her not as his wife, not as his partner, but as another deal, another calculated move on his ascent. You go ahead, Dominic said, voice distant. I'll meet you there. Bianca blinked, stunned. You can't be serious. Everything we've built, everything we've fought for, it's all on the line. I said go, Dominic snapped, his composure finally cracking. I just need a minute. Without another word, Bianca turned on her heel and stormed out, her stilettos echoing furiously across the marble floor. Dominic turned back to the window. Night had fallen. The city below sparkled with life, uncaring of the power struggle unfolding in its towers. Somewhere out there, Elena was coming to terms with her inheritance, with the unexpected authority she now held. What was she thinking? What would she do? And perhaps most urgently, what would he do to stop her? He reached for the envelope again, then let his hand fall. Not yet. He wasn't ready to face what was inside, but he would be. Soon. The room slowly emptied. One by one, the players in this high-stakes drama departed, some fuming, others quietly calculating. They would regroup, recalibrate, and return to the battlefield. But Dominic remained rooted in place, his hand unconsciously brushing the envelope in his pocket. He didn't know what was written inside, but he knew this much. The game had irrevocably shifted. And Dominic Ashford, a man who had never backed down from a fight, was not about to start now. As Miami's night sky deepened, the pieces locked into place. A new battle loomed, one of vengeance and legacy, old betrayals and unexpected alliances. At the center of it all, two former lovers turned adversaries, their fates entwined once more. The war had just begun. His jaw tightened with grim determination. The opening moves of this high-stakes battle had already been played. But none of them, not Dominic, not Elena, not anyone in that conference room, knew the real upheaval still to come. In the shadows, hidden from view and utterly unsuspected, other forces had begun to stir. Forces that would upend everything. The old order had fallen with the setting sun. A new day was beginning in Miami, and with it, a storm was rising. One that would spare no one. The lights of the Miami skyline shimmered in the distance as Elena Ramirez stood on the balcony of her compact high-rise apartment, a glass of red wine clutched loosely in her hand. The events of the day churned inside her, too chaotic for logic, too overwhelming for understanding. Just hours ago, she had been Elena Ramirez, divorced, quietly working in mid-tier finance, living paycheck to paycheck. Now she was Elena Ramirez, billionaire heiress and majority shareholder in a global shipping empire she knew nothing about. The absurdity of it was almost laughable. She still had leftover takeout in the fridge and bills on her kitchen counter, marked, past due. What did it even mean to be rich overnight when her life still bore the scars of years spent scraping by? The night breeze cooled her skin, but inside her emotions raged. Shock, rage, confusion. A strange, almost shameful exhilaration. She sipped the wine and winced at its sharp, cheap taste. Then a strange laugh escaped her lips. She could buy the whole vineyard now if she wanted. Inside, her phone buzzed on the table. Again and again. Reporters, lawyers, distant acquaintances pretending to be old friends, all scrambling to be a part of her life now that her name was attached to Harrison Bellamy's fortune. Elena ignored them. Her eyes were drawn instead to the sprawl of city lights, seeking clarity where none could be found. Who were you, Harrison Bellamy? She murmured to the night air. And why wait so long? As if in reply, her gaze fell on an old photo album resting on her coffee table. With shaking fingers, she opened it, flipping through until she found it. A faded photo of her mother, young and smiling, cradling baby Elena. For the first time, she looked at the image with new eyes, searching for echoes of the man she'd never known, her father. In the curve of her lips, the shape of her nose. Was it there? Had the clues always been in front of her, unnoticed and unspoken? Her mother had never mentioned Bellamy's name, never spoken bitterly, but perhaps that silence had been a kind of protection. Or shame. A sudden fury overtook her. How dare he? How dare Harrison Bellamy drop into her life at the last second with a fortune and a truth she never asked for? Where had he been when her mother struggled to pay rent? When Elena cried herself to sleep wondering why she didn't have a dad like everyone else? Why now? Why her? Was this inheritance a gift or a curse wrapped in gold? The wine glass shattered in her grip, shards spilling across the balcony floor. Elena hissed as a thin line of red appeared on her palm. She went inside to clean the wound. But something had changed. Beneath the pain and confusion, a new resolve took root. She hadn't asked for this legacy, but now that it was hers, she wouldn't waste it. She didn't know what her next step would be, but she knew this much. She wouldn't let Harrison Bellamy's final act define her. She would carve her own path. With a steady breath, Elena picked up her phone and dialed the number James Woodward had given her. It was time to demand answers. Across the city, in the master suite of his beachfront estate, Dominic Ashford paced the length of his room like a lion in a cage. The plush rug muted the sound of his steps, but nothing could quiet his thoughts. "This is insane," he muttered, raking his fingers through his perfectly styled hair. "It has to be some kind of trick." At the vanity, Bianca slowly removed her makeup, her face expressionless. Her movements were meticulous, carefully composed, but Dominic could see the tension in the way her shoulders held, the tightness at the corners of her mouth. "Darling," Bianca said, her voice calm but taut, "you need to breathe. Losing control won't change anything." Dominic spun toward her, eyes blazing. "Losing control? Bianca, are you hearing me? Everything I built, everything is teetering on the edge." Bianca set down her makeup cloth with a definitive snap. "Of course I hear you, Dominic, but panicking helps no one. We need to think." "Think," he echoed bitterly, almost laughing. "How are we supposed to think our way out of this? My mentor, the man I trusted, just handed control of my company to my ex-wife. My ex-wife, Bianca." The words hung in the air like smoke. Dominic sank onto the edge of the bed, his head falling into his hands. "Elena must be thrilled," he muttered, voice low and ragged. "All those years, and now she's holding everything I've worked for." He could almost see her face, cool, unreadable, victorious. Had she been waiting for this moment all along? Was this her revenge for everything that had happened between them? His mind spiraled, each thought more poisonous than the last. Bianca moved beside him, her hand gently tracing his back. "Then we'll make sure it doesn't stay that way," she said coolly. "She may own Harrison's shares, but she's not a businesswoman. She has no idea what she's gotten herself into." Dominic lifted his head slowly, the fire of calculation rekindling behind his eyes. "She'll make mistakes. And when she does," Bianca said, a razor-sharp smile forming, "we'll be waiting." Dominic nodded faintly, the ghost of a smirk playing at his lips. The idea of reclaiming what was his, proving to everyone, including Elena, that he hadn't lost his edge, was already beginning to soothe the rawness in his chest. They sat in silence, the first contours of a strategy taking shape between them. Then Dominic remembered the letter, the envelope that Lily had handed him, still unopened in his jacket pocket. His hand moved to retrieve it. Bianca noticed. "What's that?" she asked, wariness creeping into her tone. "A letter," Dominic answered quietly. "From Harrison. Lily gave it to me after the will reading." Bianca's eyes narrowed. "And you haven't read it?" Dominic stared at the envelope. For a man so accustomed to control, the hesitation was foreign. But this letter, it might hold more than just words. It might hold judgment, or worse, truth. He felt a chill run down his spine. What if it wasn't just a farewell, but a final challenge? A mirror held up to everything he didn't want to see. With a steadying breath, he broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "Dominic, if you're reading this, Then you know the truth about Elena. I can only imagine your fury. I never expected forgiveness, but I hoped maybe that in time you would understand. You were like a son to me. I saw in you what I once saw in myself: ambition, drive, a hunger to carve your name into the world. And you did. But I also watched as that hunger grew into something sharper, something colder. You succeeded, but at what cost? This isn't just about Elena, this is about you too. You're standing at a crossroads, Dominic, and I know where your path leads. I've walked it. But it's not too late to choose differently. Not yet. Elena has a good heart, a kind of quiet strength that reminds me so much of her mother. Working with her, truly collaborating, not competing, could open doors you never thought possible. I'm not asking you to abandon your ambition, Dominic. I'm challenging you to expand it, to look past balance sheets and boardroom wins, to create something lasting, something meaningful. The choice, as always, is yours. But remember, a true legacy isn't measured by profit margins or stock values. It's measured by the people we impact and the world we shape. I hope in the end you'll make me proud. Harrison Dominic stared at the letter, his mind a storm of disbelief. He had braced for bitterness, maybe even scorn. But this appeal for redemption was something else entirely. A challenge not to fight, but to grow. And it shook him more than any attack could have. For a moment, he couldn't move. His entire body locked in place as if Harrison's words had frozen time itself. Kindness, growth, these were not weapons in Dominic's usual arsenal. But something about the letter, it cracked through the armor he had spent years constructing. Well? Bianca's voice sliced into the silence, sharp and impatient. What did it say? Dominic folded the letter slowly and slid it back into his jacket pocket. Nothing important, he said flatly. Just sentimental rambling. The lie came easily, but it left a bitter taste in his mouth. He couldn't look her in the eye. Bianca gave him a long look, her instincts clearly unsettled, but before she could question him further, Dominic's phone buzzed. The name on the screen made his stomach drop. Marcus Biani. I need to take this, he muttered, already crossing to the balcony. He stepped out into the cool night and answered the call, forcing confidence into his voice. Marcus, how are? Cut the nonsense, Ashford. Biani's voice was like gravel. I just got off the phone with legal. Tell me it's not true. Did your ex-wife really just take control of your company? Dominic closed his eyes briefly. News always traveled fast in their world, but this was light speed. It's complicated. There's been a shift in ownership, yes, but I'm still CEO. Nothing changes operationally. Nothing changes? Biani barked a sharp, bitter laugh. I bought into your leadership, not hers. Who the hell is she? Some random ex with no credentials? She won't interfere, Dominic said tightly. The expansion into Asia is still proceeding. I'll keep things steady. Save the pitch, Biani snapped. There's an emergency board meeting, tomorrow, 9 a.m. You'd better have answers, and you'd better have a plan. The call ended before Dominic could reply. He stood motionless, the words from both men, Harrison and Biani, echoing in his mind. Two voices pulling him in opposite directions. One offering legacy through redemption, the other demanding blood and control. He stayed there, on the balcony, staring at the glowing sprawl of downtown Los Angeles. Behind him, Bianca's voice floated through the window, sharp, urgent, likely rallying their allies, making calls, spinning stories. But Dominic knew the truth. The storm had already broken. By sunrise, everyone in the business world would know the truth about Elena Ramirez. The foundation Dominic had spent decades building was suddenly crumbling beneath his feet. As the weight of the situation sank in, the panic that had threatened to overwhelm him was replaced by a steely resolve. Harrison's words echoed in his memory, urging him to look beyond profits and power. But all Dominic could see was a threat, a challenge to everything he had sacrificed for. No, he wouldn't let Elena dismantle what he'd built. He would fight. Every tactic, every ally, every ounce of strategy at his disposal. And when it was over, he would reclaim his throne, stronger than before. He strode back into the bedroom with renewed purpose. Bianca, he called out, his voice cutting through the early morning silence. Clear your schedule for tomorrow. We've got work to do. As the first rays of sun lit up downtown Los Angeles, the chessboard was set at center. Two former lovers, now rivals, their paths forever tangled by inheritance and legacy. Meanwhile, at a quiet beachfront cafe in Santa Monica, Elena sat across from James Whittaker. Her head buzzed with the deluge of information he had just shared. "So let me get this straight," she said slowly, struggling to process it all. "Not only did Harrison Bellamy leave me his personal estate, but he also gave me controlling shares in several corporations, including Dominic's?" Whittaker nodded, his tone measured and calm. "That's correct, Miss Ramirez. You now hold a 51% stake in Ashford Global Holdings, as well as substantial interests in several affiliated enterprises." Elena leaned back, dazed. "But why? Why now? Why me?" The attorney retrieved a thick folder from his leather briefcase. "Mr. Bellamy left detailed records explaining his reasoning. He followed your life closely, though discreetly. He expressed profound regret over never stepping forward. He believed this was the best way to do right by you." As Whittaker outlined the legalities and logistics of the bequest, Elena's thoughts drifted to her mother, Maria. Maria Ramirez had raised her alone, waitressing by day, cleaning offices at night. She never badmouthed Elena's father, just said he wasn't ready to be a dad when she needed him most. Now knowing that father was a billionaire, Elena's heart clenched. How different could their lives have been if he had stayed? Whittaker's voice cut through her reverie. "Miss Ramirez, there's one more thing. Mr. Bellamy left a personal letter addressed to you." He handed over a sealed envelope. With hands trembling slightly, Elena opened it and began to read. "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, then the truth has finally found its way to you. You must be feeling a lot right now. I only hope that one day you might find it in your heart to forgive me for being absent all these years. I met your mother Maria when we were both young, naive, driven, and full of impossible dreams. She was the most radiant, generous person I had ever known. But I was consumed by ambition, desperate to build something that would outlast me. When she told me about you, I panicked. I convinced myself that a family would derail my path, that I wasn't ready to be a father. It was the greatest mistake of my life. By the time I realized what I had sacrificed, it was already too late. Maria had passed, and you were grown. I told myself it was best to stay away, to let you live unburdened by a father who had abandoned you. But now, in these final days, I see how cowardly that choice was. I can't recover the lost years or the moments I missed. Your first steps, your graduations, the times you needed guidance. But I hope this inheritance, while an imperfect gesture, might offer some semblance of what I should have given you: security, opportunity, and the foundation to build something truly yours. You're probably wondering about Dominic Ashford and why I've entrusted you with control of his company. The truth is, Dominic reminds me of who I used to be: visionary, ruthless, talented, but increasingly blind to what really matters. I've seen him chase power the way I once did, at the expense of everything else. My hope, Elena, is that your presence in his world will disrupt that pattern, that your values, your empathy, your decency, can bring a new direction, not just for Dominic, but for Ashford Global itself. Thousands of lives are affected by the decisions made in those boardrooms, and I believe you have the wisdom and heart to make those decisions better. You may not feel ready for the burden I've placed upon you, but I've watched you from afar. I've seen your strength, your resilience, your moral clarity. You don't need to be a corporate titan to lead. You just need to be yourself. I can't undo the pain my absence has caused, but I hope this act, however delayed, might become a force for good in your life. With all my love and the deepest regret, your father, Harrison Bellamy." As Elena finished reading, silent tears ran down her face. The words cut deep, touching wounds she hadn't even realized were still raw. Grief for the father she never knew, fury at the lost years, and a strange, aching gratitude for finally being acknowledged. James Whittaker remained quiet, giving her space to absorb it all. When she finally looked up, something had changed in her eyes. Resolve. "Mr. Whittaker," she said evenly, "I think it's time I understand exactly what I've inherited, and more importantly, what I can do with it." As sunlight filled the cafe window, Elena Ramirez stepped into her new identity. Still uncertain, but no longer passive. And across town, inside Ashford Global's towering headquarters, Dominic Ashford stormed through the front lobby, every inch the powerful executive. The building, once abuzz with daily routine, had gone silent at the sight of him. Whispers and glances followed his wake. As the elevator ascended toward the top floor, Dominic's mind spun with tactics, alliances, and threats. The emergency board meeting was minutes away, and it promised to be the defining battle of his career. When the doors slid open, his assistant, Rebecca, was waiting, tense and breathless. "Mr. Ashford," she said, falling in step beside him. "The board members are already gathering in conference room A. Mr. Delacroix arrived early, and he's not happy." Dominic gave a tight nod. "Thank you, Rebecca. Hold all my calls unless it's a crisis, and get me a coffee, would you? I have a feeling I'm going to need it." As Rebecca hurried off, Dominic paused outside the conference room. Through the heavy oak doors, he could already hear the low hum of conversation. The tension inside was almost tangible. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, adjusted his cufflinks, and entered. The room fell silent. Around the long, gleaming table sat the executives and board members who had helped build Ashford Global into a dominant force. Their expressions ranged from wary to openly hostile. At the far end sat Marcel Delacroix, arms folded, face like thunder. "Well, well," Marcel drawled, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. "Nice of you to finally join us, Ashford. Care to explain how you managed to hand over your company overnight?" Dominic walked to the head of the table, every inch the composed CEO, even if his insides were roiling. "Good morning," he began smoothly. "I understand everyone has concerns, and I'm here to address them. But let me be absolutely clear. Ashford Global is not lost. Far from it." He sat down, letting his gaze travel deliberately around the table. Some faces showed doubt, others barely disguised anger, but all waited. "As you've no doubt heard, there's been a significant shift in majority ownership," Dominic continued. "Harrison Bellamy, a longtime silent partner, passed away recently. In his will, he transferred his shares to his daughter, Elena Ramirez, who until now was unknown to any of us." A ripple of murmurs echoed through the room. Dominic raised a hand. "I realize this is a surprise. No one was more blindsided than I was. But let me emphasize this. While the ownership structure has changed, our mission, our strategy, and our commitment to growth remain intact." Marcel leaned forward, his tone cutting. "Spare us the PR fluff, Dominic. Elena Ramirez is your ex-wife? Are you seriously suggesting this won't impact how we operate?" Dominic suppressed a flicker of irritation. "Yes, we were once married, but this is business. She may now be the majority shareholder, but I remain CEO. Day-to-day operations won't change." "Won't change?" Board member Janine Chow jumped in. "Dominic, our stock price dipped the minute this news broke. Investors hate uncertainty, and right now, that's all we're offering." "You're absolutely right, Janine," Dominic said with a nod, "which is why we must project unity. Elena has no background in this industry. She'll need experienced voices around her. That's where we come in." He leaned forward, his tone persuasive. "We can treat this as a threat or as an opportunity. With Elena's newfound capital, we can move faster. The Pacific expansion? We can push ahead. The merger talks we've shelved? Now viable." As Dominic laid out his strategy, the atmosphere in the room subtly shifted. The board members' rigid posture softened. Wary eyes now showed flickers of cautious optimism. Even Marcel's frown had relaxed just slightly. And then, just as Dominic felt the tide turning, the conference room door flew open. Everyone turned. Rebecca stood breathless in the doorway. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Ashford, but she's here." Dominic didn't have to ask who. "Ms. Ramirez," Rebecca said, her voice just above a whisper. "Elena Ramirez, she's in the lobby. She says she needs to speak to you and the board right away." The room erupted. Several board members began speaking at once, some demanding she be denied entry, others arguing that she should be heard immediately. Dominic felt the fragile control he'd been working so hard to re-establish slipping between his fingers. "Enough," he said sharply. The room fell silent. He took a breath, adjusted his tie. "Rebecca, show Ms. Ramirez in. It's time we had a word with our new majority shareholder." As Rebecca stepped out, Dominic met Marcel Delacroix's gaze. The investor's smirk was unmistakable, a mix of curiosity and thinly veiled satisfaction at Dominic's obvious discomfort. "Well, Ashford," Marcel drawled, leaning back in his chair, "let's see how you manage this one." Dominic clenched his jaw. He could already hear the sound of deliberate, confident footsteps approaching. The echo of heels against polished stone drew closer, and he knew. The confrontation was about to begin. The door opened. Elena Ramirez entered, no trace of the uncertain woman from the inheritance meeting. This was someone reborn, composed, direct, and radiating command. She wore a sharply cut navy blue suit that spoke volumes about her newfound role. Her dark hair was swept into a sleek chignon. When she spoke, her voice was calm, crisp, and commanding. "Good morning, everyone," Elena said, pausing as she took in the room. "I apologize for the interruption, but I felt it necessary we speak immediately." Dominic stood, forcing a smile. "Elena, this is unexpected. We were in the middle of discussing the change in ownership. Perhaps we could set up something more formal." "I think now is the perfect time, Dominic," she cut in smoothly. "These changes affect everyone at this table." Turning to the board members, who now hung on her every word, she continued, "I know this news has created uncertainty, and I understand the gravity of the responsibility I've been given. I may be new to this world, but I don't intend to remain a novice for long. I came here to listen, to learn, and to lead, with integrity." As Elena laid out her intentions, her early ideas, her emphasis on ethics, transparency, and sustainability, Dominic's unease deepened. This wasn't the Elena he remembered, the woman who had once deferred to him on every decision, who had lived in his orbit, not her own. This Elena was confident, strategic, and even worse, she was winning over the board. He watched as Janine Chow gave a small but unmistakable nod of agreement at Elena's mention of long-term environmental accountability and employee-first policies. Even Marcel Delacroix appeared intrigued when Elena mentioned opportunities for exploring new international markets. Dominic felt the grip on his control slipping again. As Elena finished her speech, Dominic cleared his throat. "Thank you, Elena, for that enlightening perspective," he said, attempting to keep his tone even. "However, as I was saying to the board before your arrival, while the ownership structure has changed, Tanner Ashford Logistics will continue to operate under my leadership as CEO." Elena turned toward him, a polite smile playing on her lips. "Of course, Dominic, your experience is valuable, but as the majority shareholder, I believe it's essential for me to be actively involved in key decision-making processes. In fact, I've already scheduled meetings with several of our primary partners to discuss potential strategic pivots for the company." Dominic felt as though the ground beneath him had vanished. Strategic pivots? "Elena, you can't just walk in and start implementing changes unilaterally. There are procedures in place, standards of governance." "I'm well aware of corporate protocols," Elena interjected smoothly, "which is why I've also called for an extraordinary general meeting next week. I believe it's time we reevaluate the company's leadership to ensure it reflects our evolving vision." Her implication was unmistakable. Elena wasn't there to sit quietly, she was there to lead. Dominic glanced around the boardroom, noting how many members now looked at Elena with cautious approval. The kingdom he had crafted, brick by brick, was dissolving before his eyes. Throughout the remainder of the meeting, Elena deftly fielded questions with an unexpected confidence, while Dominic sat increasingly sidelined. Every potential maneuver he considered was either premature or politically unwise. He was being outflanked, and he knew it. As the meeting came to an end, Elena turned to him once more. "Dominic," she said with a professional but steely smile, "I'd like to meet privately to discuss the transition. Over dinner tonight? For old time's sake?" He nodded stiffly. He had little choice. As the board members filed out, many of them stopped to greet Elena personally. Dominic stayed rooted at the head of the table, the enormity of the situation pressing down on him like gravity. Marcel Delacroix was the last to leave. He paused beside Dominic, leaned in, and said in a low voice, "She's impressive. Your ex. Maybe the company's in good hands after all." And then he was gone. Dominic remained in the conference room, now hollow and echoing with absence. The empire he'd built felt like a fragile construct, one gust away from collapse. He pulled out his phone and stared at Victoria's contact. What would he say? That everything had unraveled in a single morning? Instead, he found himself reopening Sebastian's letter. He reread the lines that echoed like prophecy more than advice. "You're at a crossroads, Dominic. The path you're on leads to a lonely place. Trust me, I've walked it. But it's not too late to change course." Dominic Ashford, the man who had always thought 10 steps ahead, now sat without a next move. Outside the Ashford Logistics Tower, Elena Ramirez stepped into the bright Southern California sunlight. She inhaled deeply, her chest rising with the warm air. The rush that had carried her through the board meeting was finally wearing off, leaving her equal parts shaken and thrilled. As her driver held the car door open, she caught her reflection in the tinted window. She barely recognized the woman staring back. A poised executive, nothing like the uncertain accountant she'd been just days ago. Inside the car, Elena allowed herself a moment to breathe. She scrolled through the barrage of missed calls and messages. One name made her pause. Lillian Cho, Sebastian Callahan's former assistant. Remembering Lillian's unease at the will reading, Elena hesitated briefly before pressing the call button. After a few rings, Lily's voice came through, tense with urgency. "Miss Ramirez, I'm so glad you called. There's something important I need to tell you. About your father and Ashford Logistics. Something that wasn't in the will or the letters. Can we meet?" Elena felt a flutter of unease rise in her chest. "Of course, Lily. How about coffee in an hour?" As she ended the call, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was once again teetering on the edge of another life-altering revelation. The pieces were in motion again, the players shifting into position. And as the sun climbed higher over Long Beach, casting elongated shadows across the city's gleaming skyline, it was becoming clear. The real game was only just beginning. Across town, the afternoon sun stretched shadows over the polished marble floors of Dominic Ashford's corner office. He stood motionless at the window, his reflection faintly superimposed against the distant Long Beach skyline. In his hand, a glass of scotch trembled ever so slightly, the amber liquid catching the sunlight. He took a slow sip, savoring the familiar burn as it slid down his throat. It had been less than 24 hours since Elena had stormed into the boardroom and unraveled everything he'd worked to build. Now he was left scrambling to keep control, not just of his company, but of his entire life. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said without turning around. Melissa, his assistant, stepped in tentatively. "Mr. Ashford, I've got the reports you requested, and there are reporters in the lobby. They're asking for a statement about the ownership changes." Dominic's grip tightened around the glass. "Tell them no comment. Get PR to draft a press release, something calm, controlled. We need to project stability." "Yes, sir?" Melissa replied, turning to leave. "Wait," Dominic said, finally turning to face her. "What are people saying? Off the record. The employees." Melissa hesitated, clearly unsure how much to share. "Honestly, sir, they're nervous. There are rumors about layoffs, about the company being broken up and sold off. Some people are already updating their resumes." Dominic gave a small nod and waved her off. As the door clicked shut behind her, he tossed back the rest of his scotch in one gulp. He needed a plan, and fast. Meanwhile, in a sunlit cafe by the beach, Elena Ramirez sat across from Lillian Cho, Sebastian Callahan's former assistant. The younger woman looked nervous, her eyes scanning the room like she was afraid of being overheard. "Thank you for meeting me, Miss Ramirez," Lillian began, her voice low. "What I'm about to tell you could change everything." Elena leaned forward, her curiosity on high alert. "What is it, Lily? What do you know about my father and Ashford Logistics?" Lillian took a deep breath, gathering her resolve. "Your father didn't just leave you those shares on a whim. He'd been planning this for a long time. He discovered things, financial discrepancies, questionable deals." Elena's pulse quickened. "Are you saying Dominic was involved in illegal activity?" "Not exactly illegal," Lillian said carefully, "but definitely unethical. Cutting corners, manipulating contracts. Your father believed Dominic was steering the company toward a cliff, and he was afraid it would all come crashing down." As she spoke, Lillian slid a USB drive across the table. "He saved everything, documents, emails, memos. It's all on here." Elena stared at the small drive, the weight of its implications hitting her like a freight train. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about exposing the truth. This was more than just a windfall. Her father hadn't merely passed down wealth and influence. He had entrusted Elena with a mission, to steer Ashford Logistics back onto a path of integrity. Meanwhile, at the lavish Belmont Shores estate, Victoria Ashford paced across the master bedroom, her Louboutin heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She stopped abruptly when she heard the front door open, tension tightening her frame as Dominic's footsteps echoed down the hall. When he entered the room, she could see the exhaustion written in every line of his face. Well, she demanded, arms crossed. What's the plan? How are we fixing this disaster? Dominic loosened his tie and sank onto the edge of the bed. I'm working on it, Victoria. These things don't turn overnight. Time? Victoria snapped, her voice rising. We don't have time, Dominic. Every second she's in control, that woman gets a stronger grip. Do you even know what people are saying? The looks I got at the club today? Dominic's temper flared. Seriously, that's your concern? What they're whispering at the country club? Victoria's eyes narrowed. Don't patronize me, Dominic. I stood by you, helped build this empire. I will not sit back while your ex-wife tears it down. As the argument escalated, neither noticed the blinking light on Dominic's phone. A missed call from Marcus Biani. The voicemail waiting in his inbox held a message that would rattle the shaky ground they stood on. In the weeks that followed, Long Beach became the setting for a ruthless power struggle. Corporate tactics blended with personal vendettas as Dominic launched a full-scale counteroffensive to keep control of Ashford Logistics. He met with major investors, spinning an optimistic narrative. New projects, explosive growth, revitalized energy thanks to Elena's stake. But behind closed doors, the reality was grimmer. Biani's voicemail had been blunt. He was considering pulling his funding. He didn't like the instability and was intrigued by Elena's ethical and forward-thinking approach. Other investors were growing wary too, some quietly aligning with her vision, others backing away altogether. In a last-ditch attempt to salvage his standing, Dominic cashed in every favor he had left. He swallowed years of pride and reached out to people he'd cut loose in his meteoric rise. One evening found him in a dim, smoky bar on the city's outskirts, seated across from Jack Reeves, a former associate he had double-crossed to secure a promotion years ago. Jack nursed a beer, eyeing him with a smirk. Well, well, Dominic Ashford, never thought I'd see you slumming it down here asking me for anything. Must be pretty damn desperate. Dominic forced a chuckle, ignoring the jab. Come on, Jack. That's all water under the bridge, right? Look, I know we've had our issues, but this is bigger. Elena doesn't understand this world. If she stays in control, a lot of good people could lose their jobs. Jack studied Dominic for a long moment. You know, there was a time I might have believed you actually cared about those people. Not so sure anymore. As Jack stood to leave, Dominic felt a familiar rush of anger, the same cold ambition that had driven him for years. But beneath it now was something new, a gnawing doubt, a creeping sense that maybe, just maybe, he'd lost sight of what really mattered. While Dominic scrambled to hold on to his empire, Elena dove headfirst into hers. Armed with the files Lily had provided, she immersed herself in corporate finance and maritime law, hiring top-tier advisors and working deep into the night, poring over contracts and company records. What she discovered was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Ashford Logistics had immense potential to do good, but its reach extended into ethically questionable territories. Turning the ship around wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be bloodless. One particularly grueling afternoon found her in a heated exchange with Roger Dawson, the company's long-standing legal chief. "Miss Humphrey," he said, his tone patronizing, "I understand your desire to implement change, but some of these practices are industry standard. If we shake things up too much, we risk losing our edge." Elena's jaw clenched. "Industry standard doesn't mean it's right, Mr. Dawson. We have the chance to set a new bar, to prove that a company can thrive without compromising its ethics." As Dawson fumbled for a rebuttal, Elena stood firm. It was in moments like this she felt her father's presence, his challenge to her, echoing in every decision. To do better, to be better. But it wasn't all business and reform. Elena also found herself thrust into the glittering, confusing world of high society. There were fundraisers, networking events, private dinners, an entire web of influence with its own unspoken rules. At one such event, the gala for the Long Beach Marine Conservation Institute, Elena came face to face with Victoria Ashford. Champagne flutes in hand, the two women regarded each other with wary civility. "Elena," Victoria said with a brittle smile. "How lovely to see you. You're looking well." Elena nodded politely. "Thank you, Victoria. You too?" An awkward pause stretched between them before Victoria leaned in, her voice low. "I hope you know what you're doing. This isn't some vanity project. Real people's lives are on the line." Elena didn't flinch. That's exactly why I'm doing this, to make sure Ashford Logistics thrives and does so with integrity. Before Victoria could respond, a small group of donors swarmed Elena, eager to meet the woman who had suddenly become one of the city's most talked-about power players. With a measured smile, Elena excused herself, leaving Victoria behind, clutching her glass a little too tightly. Back at the Ashford estate, the pressure was mounting. Late nights, constant calls, and the looming sense of unraveling control were straining Dominic and Victoria's relationship to the breaking point. One evening, as Dominic sat in his home office surrounded by reports, Victoria appeared in the doorway, dressed impeccably. "The Hendersons' anniversary party is tonight," she said sharply. "I assume you've forgotten." Dominic looked up, momentarily lost. "That's tonight? Damn it. I can't. I've got to." "Save it," Victoria cut in, her voice cool. "I'll make your excuses. Again." She turned to leave, then paused. "You know, Dominic, when I married you, I thought I was signing up for a partnership. Lately, it feels more like I'm just another asset you're trying to manage." As the door slammed behind her, Dominic slumped in his chair. His hand reached for the bottle of bourbon on his desk, then stopped. He needed clarity now, not another night blurred by alcohol. If he was going to salvage anything, he'd need his full faculties. Weeks turned into months, and the power dynamic in Long Beach began to shift. Elena, guided by her advisors and a newfound confidence, began reshaping Ashford Logistics. She introduced sweeping environmental reforms, launched a full audit of major contracts, and pursued partnerships with green technology firms. To Dominic's surprise and reluctant admiration, many of her initiatives were well received. After an initial market wobble, the company's stock began to stabilize and climb. Employees who once viewed Elena with suspicion now rallied behind her vision of a more ethical, progressive Ashford Logistics. From the sidelines, Dominic watched, caught between pride and bitterness. He saw the company he'd built evolving in ways he never anticipated, ways he had once ridiculed, and yet succeeding. Somewhere beneath the resentment and frustration, another feeling stirred. Regret, maybe. A quiet longing for the man he might have become had he made different choices. As autumn cast a golden light across Long Beach, both Elena and Dominic found themselves at crossroads. For Elena, the chaos of early leadership had settled into a steady rhythm. She'd earned respect, not just for surviving, but for leading with vision. But the pressures remained, an entrenched old guard, delicate partnerships, and the ever-present shadow of her father's legacy. One crisp morning, walking along the beach before heading to the office, Elena reflected on the whirlwind of change. The crashing waves offered a rare moment of peace. Her phone buzzed. Another email from Dominic, this time requesting a meeting. Despite the reforms, Dominic remained CEO, and that unresolved tension loomed over every major decision. Elena sighed. It was time to decide his future with the company. Across town, Dominic was facing his own reckoning. The past few months had stripped away his armor. He'd watched Elena accomplish things he once dismissed as naive. In quiet, sleepless nights, he reread Sebastian's letter. Words that had once infuriated him now rang with truth. He thought about the younger man he had been, driven not by profit, but purpose, about the dream that had built Ashford Logistics in the first place. And he realized that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to steer things back toward that dream. That Friday afternoon, the meeting took place. Elena, braced for yet another standoff, entered the conference room to find a different Dominic waiting. Gone was the defensive, combative figure of recent months. Instead, he looked tired, but sincere. "Elena," he began, his voice soft, stripped of its usual bravado. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Dominic began, his tone unusually measured. "About the company, about the changes you've been making, about the kind of legacy I want to leave behind." Elena listened, cautious but intrigued, as Dominic outlined a proposal. He wanted to collaborate, not compete. He offered to combine his deep industry knowledge with her fresh, ethical perspective. Together, he believed they could take Ashford Logistics to heights it had never reached before. As he spoke, Elena felt a glimmer of hope. This was the man she had once fallen in love with, the visionary she had believed in before everything fell apart. Could they really build something new together? They talked for hours, debating, strategizing, and finally finding common ground. By the time the sun set over Long Beach, casting a golden hue across the conference room, Alina and Dominic had laid the foundation of a new partnership. They exited the building side by side, deep in conversation. Employees who had been watching the power struggle unfold for months looked on in shock and tentative relief. The two leaders, once adversaries, were suddenly aligned. Word of the reconciliation spread quickly. The atmosphere within Ashford Logistics began to change. The tension that had hung like a storm cloud lifted. Employees who had been hedging their bets now felt confident in their leadership. They began to believe in the company's future again. Over the following weeks, Alina and Dominic presented a united front. They hosted employee town halls, met personally with key investors, and gave joint interviews to major media outlets. The message was clear. Ashford Logistics was entering a new era, one that honored its past while embracing a sustainable, ethical future. The market responded favorably. The company's stock climbed, new partnerships formed. The chaos that had followed Sebastian's will was finally settling into something resembling order. Even Victoria, who had been growing more distant from Dominic, began to soften. Seeing him re-energized and full of purpose reminded her of the man she had married. Slowly, they started rebuilding, talking about the future, not just in business terms, but as partners again. As the holiday season descended on Long Beach, bringing lights and festivities, a sense of resolution settled over Ashford Logistics. Alina had proven herself as a leader. Dominic had found renewed purpose, and the company they both loved was thriving. At the company's annual holiday party, held at a lavish waterfront venue, Alina and Dominic stood together on stage addressing employees and their families. They raised a toast to the future of Ashford Logistics. The applause was genuine, the smiles warm. Later that night, Alina slipped out onto the balcony for a moment of quiet. She looked out over the sparkling city lights, thinking about her father. Was this what Sebastian had envisioned when he left everything to her? Had he known she and Dominic would find a way to come together? Had he believed they could make real, lasting change? As if drawn by her thoughts, Dominic joined her, slipping beside her in silence. They stood there for a while, both lost in reflection. "You know," Dominic said quietly, "I think Sebastian would be proud of both of us." Alina smiled softly. "Yeah, I think so too." They turned and headed back inside, a sense of closure wrapping around them like the winter breeze. The burden of inheritance, of conflict and power, no longer felt like a weight on Alina's shoulders. It felt like a purpose. But life, as they were about to be reminded, doesn't often allow for tidy endings. Across town, in a dimly lit office, a figure sat hunched over a computer screen, scrolling through stolen data from Ashford Logistics servers. Emails, financial records, confidential contracts, all painting a picture of the company's past misdeeds and current weaknesses. The figure leaned back, a slow, satisfied smile curling across their face. This was exactly what they'd been looking for. The ammunition to bring Ashford Logistics to its knees. With a few final keystrokes, the stolen data was encrypted and uploaded to a secure offshore server. The figure then reached for a burner phone, dialing a number committed to memory. "It's done," they said simply when the call connected. "We have everything we need. Ashford Logistics won't know what hit them." As the call ended, the figure stood and stretched after hours of hunched concentration. Outside, the Long Beach night echoed with laughter, music, and the hum of celebration. But for Ashford Logistics, the real fireworks were still to come. Back at the holiday party, blissfully unaware of the looming threat, Alina and Dominic moved among employees and their families, exchanging warm greetings and sharing in the festive cheer. The mood was light, champagne flowed freely, and the air was filled with laughter. Victoria, radiant in an emerald gown, approached them, a glass of bubbly in hand. Her smile was polished, though not entirely sincere. "Well," she said, swirling her drink, "you two certainly know how to throw a party. I must say I'm impressed by how smoothly you've managed to patch things up." Alina nodded cordially, still uncertain about how to navigate the new, delicate balance with her predecessor. "Thank you, Victoria. It's been a team effort." Sensing the tension, Dominic quickly redirected the conversation. "Have you tried the hors d'oeuvres? The caterers really went above and beyond this year." They chatted lightly about the food and decor, skimming over deeper currents none of them dared confront. Outside, beneath the glittering lights of Long Beach, a storm gathered silently, ready to test everything they had built. The party gradually wound down in the early hours of the morning. Tired but content, employees spilled out into the chilly night. Elena, Dominic, and Victoria were among the last to leave, lingering by the entrance as they waited for their cars. An awkward silence settled between them. Despite the renewed partnership between Elena and Dominic, unresolved tension still lingered, especially with Victoria. She finally broke the silence with a cool, clipped voice. "Well, this has been enlightening." She turned to Dominic. "Shall we?" Dominic nodded, then turned to Elena. "Good night, Elena. We'll go over those new contracts Monday?" "Of course," Elena replied with a polite smile. "Have a good weekend, both of you." As Dominic and Victoria's car pulled away, Elena watched their taillights vanish into the night. Despite the evening's outward success, the nagging feeling from earlier returned, stronger now. Something felt off. She tried to shake it off, blaming it on fatigue. The past year had been a whirlwind of upheaval, transformation, and challenges. Surely it was just nerves, she reasoned. Sliding into her car, she leaned back against the seat, reflecting on the incredible journey she'd taken. She had learned so much, grown stronger. Whatever lay ahead, she told herself, she was ready. But she had no idea how quickly that confidence would be tested. The following Monday dawned bright and crisp, a quintessential Southern California winter morning. Elena arrived at Ashford Logistics early, eager to start the week strong. But something was off the moment she stepped through the doors. Clusters of employees stood in tense circles, murmuring in hushed voices. Conversations stopped the moment she passed by, replaced by stiff smiles and overly enthusiastic greetings. By the time she reached her office, Elena's unease had transformed into full-blown anxiety. Something was definitely wrong. Her fears were confirmed when Dominic's assistant, Melissa, burst into her office without knocking, which she had never done before. Her face was pale, eyes wide. "Miss Ashford," Melissa gasped, "you need to see this, now." She thrust a tablet into Elena's hands. On the screen was a breaking article from one of the nation's most respected business publications. The headline made Elena's blood run cold. "Ashford Logistics Scandal. Leaked documents reveal years of fraud and environmental violations." As she scanned the article, her heart sank with every paragraph. Their hard-won peace had been nothing more than a brief calm before the storm. The real battle for Ashford Logistics, for her own legacy, was just beginning. The exposé painted a damning picture of Ashford's past. Financial manipulation, environmental negligence, ethical violations spanning years. Some incidents clearly predated Elena's involvement. But disturbingly, others were recent, squarely under her watch as majority shareholder. Her thoughts raced. Who could have leaked such detailed records? How had they accessed so much classified information? And more urgently, how were they going to manage this crisis? Her phone buzzed. A message from Dominic. "Emergency board meeting. 30 minutes. War room." Elena exhaled slowly, steeling herself. As she gathered her things and left her office, one thought gnawed at her. Had Dominic's recent cooperation been sincere? Or had he been biding his time, waiting for a moment to strike? The war room was already buzzing when she arrived. Board members, legal counsel, PR consultants, all talking over each other in a haze of panic and confusion. Dominic stood at the head of the table, his jaw tight, eyes shadowed by exhaustion and fury. When he saw Elena, something flickered across his face. Relief? Guilt? It vanished too quickly to read. "Elena," he said, voice taut. "Good. We need to coordinate a response, fast. This story's blowing up across every outlet." She nodded, taking her seat. The glances from other board members were sharp, speculative. Was she involved? Could she weather this storm? The next few hours blurred into tense strategy sessions, legal briefings, and endless drafts of statements. Elena found herself defending a legacy she'd barely inherited, reassuring a company she'd only just begun to lead, all while trying to appear calm and in control. New details emerged. The documents had been sent anonymously to several top media outlets. The source claimed to be a whistleblower, someone with internal access to company records. Paranoia spread like wildfire. Every board member was eyeing the others, silently wondering, was it you? By late evening they had formed a strategy. Ashford would acknowledge past errors, highlight the sweeping changes Elena had already implemented, and promise a full internal audit. As the room cleared, only she and Dominic remained. The weight of the day hung between them. "Elena?" Dominic began, voice unusually soft. "I want you to know I had nothing to do with this, whatever you're thinking." "I believe you," Elena cut in, surprising even herself. And she did. In this, at least, she trusted him. "But Dominic, we both know this isn't over," she added. "Whoever leaked this, they're not done. This was just the beginning." Dominic nodded grimly. "You're right, this is war. But we're in it together now. Whatever our past, we stand united. It's the only way through." They shook hands, an uneasy truce forged in crisis. Outside Ashford Logistics HQ, night had fallen, but the buzz of breaking news lit up the city. Reporters lined the sidewalks, cameras ready. Social media was ablaze with speculation and outrage. And across town, in a dim apartment, the architect of the leak sat before a dark monitor, a slow smile curling on their lips. Now it was time to prepare for Phase 2. As Elena and Dominic steeled themselves for the battle ahead, the true test of their leadership and the future of Ashford Logistics was only just beginning. The following weeks were a whirlwind of crisis management. Elena and Dominic worked nearly around the clock, extinguishing fires and bracing for new ones as each day unveiled fresh challenges. Investors began pulling out, spooked by the instability and mounting media scrutiny. Long-standing contracts were suddenly under review. Outside the company's downtown Los Angeles offices, environmental groups gathered daily, protesting decades of alleged corporate negligence. Through it all, Elena and Dominic maintained a united public front. They held press briefings, met one-on-one with key stakeholders, and accelerated new transparency initiatives. But behind the scenes, the pressure was taking a toll. One particularly grueling night, while they combed through yet another batch of leaked documents in Elena's office, Dominic broke the silence. "How much did you know?" he asked quietly, eyes fixed on the papers in front of him. Elena froze, her coffee mug halfway to her lips. "What do you mean?" Dominic finally looked up. His eyes were exhausted but focused. "About all of this? The cut corners? The cover-ups? You've been in charge for months now. Did you really not see any of it?" A flicker of anger rose in Elena. How dare he suggest she was complicit? But just as quickly, the anger gave way to uncertainty. Had she missed something? Had she been so focused on change, on moving forward, that she failed to look back closely enough? She started, then paused to gather her thoughts. "I knew there were problems, Dominic. That's why I started pushing reforms right away. But the scale of this? No. I didn't know. Did you?" Dominic hesitated, visibly wrestling with his own guilt. "Some of it," he admitted. "Not everything, but enough. Enough to know I should have acted sooner." The air between them grew heavy with the weight of shared regret. Two people no longer adversaries, no longer even partners in that moment, but simply flawed individuals grappling with consequences. Their moment was shattered by a rapid knock at the door. Melissa, Dominic's assistant, stepped inside, her face pale. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice unsteady. "But you both need to see this." She handed Elena a tablet. An anonymous email had just been sent company-wide, and to every major media outlet in the country. It detailed recent confidential board meetings and exposed private conversations between Elena and Dominic, painting them as desperate co-conspirators trying to obscure Ashford's troubled legacy rather than fix it. But the true bombshell came at the bottom of the message. "For those wondering about the source of these leaks, wonder no more. I am Victoria Ashford, wife of Dominic Ashford, and I have stood silently by as this company sacrificed lives and the environment for profit. No more. The truth must come out, no matter the cost." Elena and Dominic stared at each other in stunned disbelief. "Victoria?" Elena whispered. "That can't be right." "I have to talk to her," Dominic said abruptly, already striding toward the door. "I need to understand." But before he could reach it, the door burst open. A team of FBI agents swept into the room, led by a stern woman in a tailored dark blazer. "Elena Callahan." "Dominic Ashford," she announced, holding up a badge. "I'm Special Agent Reyes. You're under arrest on charges of fraud, environmental violations, and obstruction of justice." Cameras flashed through the glass walls of the office as stunned employees watched the scene unfold. Handcuffed and escorted out, Elena felt as though she were sleepwalking through a nightmare. How had it come to this? What began as an effort to restore her father's legacy had now thrust her into a legal and personal reckoning she never could have imagined. The following days blurred together. Interrogations, legal strategy sessions, and restless nights in holding cells. Elena and Dominic were kept apart, each left alone with their thoughts, wondering whether the other had truly been an ally or part of the betrayal. It was during one of those long, solitary nights in custody that Elena Callahan received an unexpected visitor. James Whitaker, the attorney who had read her father's will all those months ago, was escorted into the holding cell by a guard. "Miss Callahan," he said, his tone grave. "I'm afraid I have some very difficult information to share." Elena braced herself. What else could possibly go wrong, she thought. "What is it, Mr. Whitaker?" The lawyer exhaled slowly. "It's about your father, Edward Callahan, and the inheritance he left you." As Whitaker began to speak, Elena felt the ground shift beneath her. Once again, the truth she was hearing seemed almost too wild to believe. But as he laid it out, piece by piece she began to understand, and everything started to make a dark kind of sense. Edward Callahan had not been the principled, successful businessman he had always presented himself as. In reality, he had built his empire through decades of fraud, insider trading, and environmental exploitation. The very same practices Ashford Logistics now stood accused of had once been standard operating procedure at Callahan Enterprises. "But why?" Elena whispered, barely able to form the words. "Why leave it all to me? Why not just take his secrets to the grave?" Whitaker's expression was weary, equal parts pity and resignation. "From what we've uncovered, your father was dying with a guilty conscience. He saw you as his shot at redemption, not just for himself, but for the entire broken system he helped create." "By making me clean up his mess," Elena said flatly, her voice thick with realization. Whitaker nodded solemnly. "It appears he believed that by giving everything to someone outside the old corrupt network, someone with integrity, he could force a reckoning." The enormity of the situation crashed over Elena like a wave. She felt a riot of emotions: anger at being manipulated, grief for the man she'd never really known, and a quiet, unyielding determination to see this through. Across town, in a separate holding cell, Dominic Ashford sat in silence, tormented by his own thoughts. Victoria's betrayal cut deeply, but not as deeply as the dawning realization of just how far he had drifted from the idealistic man who had once dreamed of building a company that made a difference. As he sat there, head in his hands, the metal door creaked open. Dominic looked up to find Marcus Blackwell, his former top investor, standing outside the cell with a guard. "You've got 10 minutes, the guard said gruffly before stepping back. Marcus looked at Dominic with a mix of disappointment and something else. Something that might have been pity. "Oh, how the mighty have fallen," Marcus said, shaking his head slowly. Dominic straightened, some of his old edge returning. "If you're here to gloat, Marcus, save it. I'm not in the mood." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Gloat? No, Dominic. I'm here to offer you a way out." As Marcus laid out his proposal, Dominic felt a cold chill creep down his spine. It was straightforward and revolting. He could preserve a portion of his fortune and avoid the harshest legal outcomes. All he had to do was throw Elena under the bus. Shift the blame. Paint her as the mastermind behind Ashford. "Think it over," Marcus said as he turned to leave. "You've got until tomorrow to decide. After that, well, your window closes." Left alone once more, Dominic stared at the floor, his mind a battlefield. A choice now lay before him. Sell out Elena and save himself, or hold on to whatever integrity he still had left. It was the kind of ruthless choice Dominic Ashford had made countless times in his climb to the top. But as he sat there contemplating his next move, he found himself thinking of Edward Callahan's letter, the man he'd once looked up to, the man he'd once aspired to become. For the first time in years, Dominic felt the stirring of something he believed had long died. His conscience. As dawn broke over Long Beach, casting long shadows across the coastline, the stage was set for a final confrontation, one that would decide the fate of Ashford Logistics and everyone entangled in its legacy. Outside the courthouse, a media frenzy was in full swing. Journalists and protesters jostled for position, shouting questions, holding signs, cameras flashing as Elena Callahan and Dominic were escorted through the crowd. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone knew this day's proceedings would be anything but routine. When the judge called the court to order, Alina's attorney stood. "Your Honor, before we begin, my client would like to make a statement." A murmur swept through the courtroom as Alina rose and walked to the stand. She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping the room before landing on Dominic. Their eyes locked, just for a moment, and a lifetime of history passed silently between them. "Your Honor," Alina began, her voice steady but heavy with emotion, "I'm not here to claim innocence. I'm here to take responsibility, not only for what I've done, but for the legacy I inherited." She went on to describe the full scope of Edward Callahan's manipulations, the way he'd tried to use her as a tool for redemption, passing down a tainted empire in the hopes she could cleanse it. She detailed her own missteps and her struggle to enact change from within a corrupt system. "I cannot undo the damage that's been done," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I can promise this. I will use the resources I've been given to make it right, to repair what's been broken, to set a new example for what corporate leadership should look like." When Alina stepped down, the room was silent. But before order could fully settle, Dominic rose to his feet. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "I'd like to speak as well." What followed left even the most jaded courtroom observers stunned. Dominic laid bare the truth: the backroom deals, the regulatory violations, the environmental damage, and the human costs. He didn't spare himself. He named names. He listed the politicians, industry leaders, and yes, even judges, who had aided and profited from the corruption. When he finished, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Then came the crash of the courtroom doors opening. Special Agent Reyes and a team of FBI agents stormed in. "Marcus Blackwell," Reyes called, her voice resolute, "you are under arrest for racketeering, bribery, and conspiracy to obstruct justice." As Blackwell was cuffed and led out, sputtering with rage, Alina and Dominic exchanged a look of disbelief. The house of cards was collapsing, and they were standing in the center of the wreckage. The judge, visibly shaken, called for a recess. Hours passed. Finally, Alina and Dominic were brought back into the courtroom. The judge's tone was solemn. "In light of today's extraordinary revelations and your full cooperation, this court is prepared to show leniency. However, your actions, however well-intentioned in the end, do not come without consequences." The sentence, when it came, was both punishment and opportunity. Alina Callahan and Dominic Ashford would avoid prison, but Ashford Logistics would be dissolved. Its vast assets were to be restructured into a new foundation focused on environmental restoration and corporate ethics reform. An organization Alina and Dominic would be required to lead together as part of their rehabilitation. As they exited the courthouse, blinking under the barrage of flashing cameras, Alina turned to Dominic with a familiar smirk. "So," she said, a trace of their old chemistry in her tone. "Partners again?" Dominic managed a wry smile. "Looks like it. Think we can do better this time?" Before Alina could answer, a young woman stepped forward from the crowd gathered on the courthouse steps. It took Alina a second to recognize her, Lily Chen, her father's former assistant. "Miss Callahan, Mr. Ashford," Lily said, her tone urgent. "There's something you need to know about Victoria." As Lily began to speak, Alina and Dominic listened, stunned. The story she shared sounded almost unbelievable, but it explained everything. Victoria hadn't acted alone. She had been part of a broader conspiracy that also included Edward Callahan himself. The leaks, the unraveling of Ashford Logistics, even the downfall of its leadership, it had all been orchestrated, a plan initiated years ago. "But why?" Alina asked, struggling to absorb this final, staggering twist. Lily handed over a flash drive. "This has everything, recorded by your father before he died. In short, he believed the system was too broken to fix. The only way to spark true change was to tear it all down and start fresh." Alina and Dominic stood in silence as the weight of the revelation settled on them. They had been pawns in a game far more complex and far-reaching than they had ever imagined. Yet, amidst the ruins, something unexpected happened. Dominic reached for Alina's hand. For a fleeting moment, they were no longer corporate adversaries or scandal-stained figures, but two idealists who had once dreamed of changing the world. "Well," Dominic said, the glimmer of his old charm returning, "if we're burning it all down to start over, let's make sure we build it better." Elena felt a real smile rise, her first in what seemed like years. "Together?" she asked, tightening her grip on his hand. "Together," Dominic nodded, their eyes locking with shared resolve. As they walked down the courthouse steps, hand in hand, neither could foresee the challenges waiting ahead. The road to redemption would be long, riddled with obstacles and painful truths. But for the first time in a long while, they had something they both believed in: purpose. The sun dipped below the Long Beach skyline, casting long shadows over a city in flux. Elena and Dominic stepped into that uncertainty, ready to face whatever came next. What they didn't know, couldn't yet know, was that the story was far from over. In the shadows, new players were already taking position, preparing to test the fragile order Elena and Dominic hoped to build. The next chapter in this story of power, redemption, and the ever-blurred lines of justice was about to begin. The fall of Ashford Logistics had sent shockwaves through every layer of Long Beach society. In the weeks that followed, the full reach of the corruption became apparent, spanning business, politics, law enforcement, and even the judiciary itself. But for Elena Callahan and Dominic Ashford, this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The aftermath was a whirlwind of activity. The creation of the new foundation, provisionally named the Callahan-Ashford Initiative for Corporate Responsibility and Environmental Restoration, consumed their days and nights. Elena and Dominic found themselves working closely together once more, but this time with a shared purpose that went far beyond profit margins and market shares. One crisp autumn morning, Elena stood at the window of their new office, a converted warehouse space near the docks. The view was a far cry from Dominic's old penthouse suite, but she found herself preferring it. From here, she could see the tangible results of their work. Ships being retrofitted with cleaner technology, green zones being developed along the bay, and a bustling job training center welcoming former Ashford Logistics employees into a new chapter. Penny for your thoughts? Dominic's voice broke her reverie. She turned to find him leaning in the doorway, 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. Elena accepted one with a faint smile. Just thinking about how much has changed. A year ago, none of this even seemed possible. Dominic nodded and joined her at the window. "I know what you mean. Sometimes I wake up wondering if it's all just been some dream or a nightmare, depending on the day." They stood together in companionable silence, sipping their coffee and watching the energy of the port below. The ease between them still caught Elena off guard. It wasn't the passionate connection they once shared, nor the bitter resentment that followed their breakup. It was something new, a partnership forged in fire, tempered by hardship, purpose, and the long, messy road to redemption. "Have you heard from Victoria?" Elena asked, her voice tentative. Dominic's expression hardened ever so slightly. "No, not since everything surfaced. Last I heard, she's in Europe, staying under the radar until the storm quiets down." Elena nodded, uncertain how to respond. Victoria's betrayal, her part in the carefully orchestrated downfall of Ashford Logistics, and her role in the wider scheme crafted by Edward Callahan still cast a long shadow. Despite it all, Elena knew part of Dominic still wrestled with that betrayal, still carried something for the woman who had once been his closest confidant. "And you?" Dominic asked, turning the focus back on her. "How are you holding up with everything?" Elena knew what he meant, the truth about her father. The realization that her inheritance had been nothing more than the opening move in a long, calculated game. It was a scar she hadn't yet come to terms with, layers of grief, guilt, and reluctant understanding. "I'm still processing," she said, her voice quiet. "Some days I resent him for pulling me into this, using me as his redemption project. Other days I think I understand him, even respect him in a strange, complicated way." Dominic reached out, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it carried weight. Elena didn't pull away. "He was a complicated man," Dominic said softly. "But whatever his intentions were, whatever his flaws, he gave you the chance to do something meaningful. And you are. You're making it count." A lump caught in Elena's throat. She felt the sincerity in his words, and it moved her more than she expected. Before she could respond, a knock at the door broke the moment. Lily Chen, now their trusted executive assistant, peeked in. "Sorry to interrupt, but your 10 o'clock is here. Representatives from the dockworkers union." Elena and Dominic exchanged a look, one of quiet resolve. The work was far from over, but they were ready. The moment passed, it was time to get back to work. As they made their way to the conference room, Elena marveled at how naturally she and Dominic had settled into their new roles. There were still moments of friction, of course. Old wounds didn't disappear overnight. But there was also mutual respect now, a shared commitment to doing better, to being better. The meeting with the union representatives was lengthy and at times tense. The collapse of Ashford Logistics had left many workers uncertain about their futures. And while the Callahan-Ashford initiative was generating new opportunities, there were still voids to fill. Elena and Dominic listened carefully, taking notes, offering solutions where possible. When the union reps filed out, looking cautiously optimistic, Elena felt a rare sense of pride. This was leadership. Not hiding in a high-rise office making decisions in a vacuum, but standing shoulder to shoulder with the people, listening, engaging, solving problems together. The rest of the day dissolved into a blur of calls, emails, and strategy sessions. It was well after sunset when Elena and Dominic found themselves alone again, slouched in the conference room amid empty takeout containers and half-finished coffee. "We need to talk about the Palmer contract," Dominic said, rubbing at his eyes. "If we can get them to sign on to the new environmental standards, it could set a precedent for the entire logistics sector." Elena nodded, suppressing a yawn. "Agreed, but that's tomorrow's fight. Right now, we both need some rest." As they packed up to leave, Elena was hit by a wave of nostalgia. How many late nights like this had they shared in the early years of their marriage? Dreaming big, building plans, imagining the empire they'd one day create. "Dominic," she said quietly, impulsively, "do you ever wonder if things had gone differently, if we hadn't lost sight of what really mattered?" She trailed off, unsure where she was going with it. Dominic looked at her, eyes unreadable for a long beat. Then finally, "Every day," he said softly. "But maybe this is our second chance. Not to go back, but to build something better." Elena's heart skipped at his words, but before she could reply, Dominic's phone buzzed. He glanced down, and his expression shifted. "It's Biani's lawyer," he said, voice returning to business. "They want to talk plea deal. Sounds like Marcus is ready to name names for leniency." Elena nodded, pushing aside her emotion. "We should listen. If what he has can help us go deeper, it's worth it." As they stepped into the cool evening air, Elena noticed how different the city looked now. The once dazzling skyline that had symbolized wealth and ambition now seemed almost hollow, an elaborate mask concealing years of decay. But there was also hope, a sense that real, lasting change wasn't just possible, it had already begun. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of the Ashford scandal continued to spread. Biani's cooperation opened doors, leading to a wave of high-profile arrests that shook the foundations of both business and government circles. Through it all, Elena and Dominic stayed focused on their mission. The spotlight was relentless. Some called them visionaries, others labeled them traitors. But they tuned out the noise and leaned into the work, measuring success not in headlines, but in community impact. One unforgettable day found them standing side by side at the grand opening of a new community center in a historically underserved part of the city. Funded by the Callahan-Ashford initiative, the center would offer job training, childcare, and vital social services. As Elena snipped the ribbon amid cheers and camera flashes, she looked across the crowd and locked eyes with Dominic. The look he gave her, full of warmth and quiet pride, made her chest tighten. This, she realized, was success. Not market gains or boardroom victories, but people, progress, purpose. The celebration was in full swing when Elena felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find James Woodward, the attorney who had read Gerald Callahan's will all those months ago. "Miss Ashford," he said, his expression grave, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to see." He led her to a quiet corner away from the festivities and handed her an envelope. "This was left with my office to be delivered to you today. It's from your father." With trembling hands, Elena opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Gerald Callahan's distinctive handwriting. "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, then everything has gone according to plan. The old system has been exposed, the corrupt power structures shaken to their core, And you, my daughter, have been instrumental in bringing about this change. I know you must have questions, must feel anger and betrayal for the role I forced you to play. But I hope by now you've come to understand the necessity of what we've done. The world we lived in was broken, Alina. The relentless pursuit of profit was tearing apart not only our environment, but the moral fabric of our society. Someone had to force a reckoning. Who better than a man with nothing to lose and a daughter with the strength to rebuild from the ruins? I won't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I do ask that you continue the work we started. The Callahan-Ashford Initiative can be so much more than a corporate responsibility foundation. It can be the beginning of a new way of doing business, a model for justice, sustainability, and integrity. You have the power to change the world, Alina. Not with ambition, but with compassion. Not with strategy, but with sincerity. I may not have been the father you deserved in life, but in death, I hope I've given you the tools to become the leader this world so desperately needs. With all my love and faith, Geraldine. As Alina finished reading, a storm of emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Anger, sadness, pride, and a fierce resolve. She was still trying to process the letter when Dominic approached. Elena, are you okay? She looked up, blinking back tears she hadn't realized had formed. Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. Dominic read in silence. His expression shifted from concern to disbelief to a resigned understanding. When he looked back at her, there was a question in his eyes. What are you thinking? He asked gently. Elena took a deep breath. I'm thinking my father was a brilliant visionary and a manipulative bastard, and I'm not sure whether to thank him or hate him. Dominic gave a dry smile. Sounds about right. So what do we do now? Elena looked around the room at the celebration continuing around them, the people whose lives they were trying to improve. She thought about the hurdles that still remained, the powerful interests they were sure to face, and then about the opportunity to build something radically better. We keep going, she said, a new steel in her voice. We do exactly what we've been doing, but bigger. We take the Callahan-Ashford Initiative global. We share our story. We use what we've learned to inspire systemic change. Dominic's eyes sparked with renewed fire. That's going to be a battle. We'll be up against the biggest names in the world. Elena smiled. For the first time in a long time, she felt completely aligned with her purpose. Since when have we ever backed down from a challenge? As they returned to the celebration, a weight seemed to lift from Elena's shoulders. The future was uncertain. The road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time since inheriting her father's fortune, she felt she was truly earning the legacy, not the money or the name, but the chance to make a real difference. In the months that followed, the city of Pacific Shore began to transform. The Callahan-Ashford Initiative extended its influence far beyond logistics, becoming a guiding light across industries. Green startups blossomed. Former Ashford logistics workers found new opportunities. The city itself gained a reputation as a rising model for responsible capitalism. Elena and Dominic worked side by side, implementing their shared vision. Their partnership, once broken by ego and betrayal, had been reborn in shared purpose. Nearly 1 year after Gerald's will had upended everything, Elena and Dominic stood on the balcony of their new offices. Looking out over the city they had helped transform, Elena asked suddenly, "Do you ever miss it? The old days, I mean. The power, the prestige?" Dominic was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes," he admitted finally. "It's hard not to. But then I look at what we're building here, the real impact we're having, and I realize this is worth so much more." Elena nodded, completely understanding. She, too, had moments of nostalgia for the simpler days, before the weight of her inheritance and the responsibilities it carried had reshaped her world. But like Dominic, she wouldn't trade their current path for anything. As they stood there, the setting sun painting the Pacific Shore skyline in vivid shades of orange and pink, Elena was struck by a sudden realization. "You know," she said, turning to Dominic with a small smile, "I think this is the first time in my life I truly feel like I'm living up to my potential, like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Dominic returned her smile and reached out to take her hand. The gesture felt comfortable and familiar, echoing both their past and the steady foundation they were now building together. I know exactly what you mean, he said softly. As night fell over Pacific Shore, Alina and Dominic remained on the balcony, speaking quietly about the future. They talked of expanding the Callahan-Ashford initiative's reach, of challenging more corporations to follow their model, and even using their influence to advocate for policy reform on a global scale. But they also spoke about healing old wounds, about forgiveness, and about the possibility of a future together, one neither had dared to imagine until now. When they finally prepared to leave for the evening, Elena paused at the door and looked back at the city. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "my father once told me that a true legacy isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the lives we touch and the change we make in the world." Dominic nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He was right about that, at least. "Yes," Alina agreed, "and I think we're finally building a legacy we can be proud of." As they stepped out into the cool night air, walking side by side toward an uncertain but hopeful future, Alina felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be battles to fight and setbacks to endure. But for the first time in years, she felt genuinely and deeply content. The story of Alina Callahan and Dominic Ashford was far from over. But this chapter, a story of betrayal, redemption, and the power of second chances, had come to a close. And as Pacific Shore slumbered beneath a canopy of stars, dreaming of a brighter tomorrow, Elena and Dominic walked hand in hand toward a new beginning, with hope, determination, and the unshakable belief that together they could change the world. In the end, it wasn't about money, power, or even legacy. It was about two people who had lost their way, found each other again, and in doing so, discovered a greater purpose. A purpose rooted in justice, not the punitive kind, but the transformative power of doing what's right, no matter the cost. 5 years after the upheaval that redefined Pacific Shore's corporate landscape, the city pulsed with renewed energy. The Callahan-Ashford initiative had grown from a local foundation into a global force for ethical enterprise and environmental responsibility. Its impact could be seen everywhere, from solar-paneled skyscrapers to flourishing green zones and innovative programs uplifting underserved communities. On a warm summer evening, Alina stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Pacific Shore Convention Center. The room was filled with global leaders, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and changemakers. It was the opening night of the initiative's annual Global Business Ethics Summit. 5 years ago, Alina began, her voice steady and resolute, we stood at a crossroads. The old way, prioritizing profit above all else, had brought us to the brink of environmental and social collapse. We had a choice: continue down that path or forge a new one. As she spoke, her gaze swept across the audience. Dominic sat in the front row, pride beaming in his expression. Beside him, Lily Chen, now the initiative's chief of operations, nodded in encouragement. James Woodward was there too, the lawyer whose reading of Gerald Callahan's will had unknowingly set everything in motion. "We chose the harder path," Alina continued. "We chose accountability, transparency, compassion. It hasn't been easy. We've faced doubt, resistance, and even open hostility, but look at what we've accomplished." Behind her, large screens displayed images of the initiative's projects around the world: sustainable aquaculture in Southeast Asia, solar grids in sub-Saharan Africa, revitalized urban neighborhoods in South America. "This isn't just about Pacific Shore anymore," she said. "It's about proving that ethical business isn't a dream, it's a reality." "It's proof," Elena concluded, her voice resonating through the grand ballroom, "that we can create wealth without destroying our planet or exploiting one another." The room erupted into thunderous applause as she stepped away from the podium, her heart swelling with pride and hard-won satisfaction. The road had been long and treacherous, but every sacrifice, every difficult decision had brought them to this moment. Later that evening, as guests mingled over cocktails and soft music floated through the convention center, Elena found herself on the balcony overlooking the Pacific Shore harbor. The water shimmered under the moonlight, and the cool breeze was a welcome contrast to the warmth inside. Dominic joined her, handing her a glass of champagne. "Quite a night," he said with a smile. "You nailed that speech." Elena smiled, tapping her glass gently against his. "Thanks. I still get nervous every time. Keeps me grounded, I suppose." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the movement of ships in the harbor and the lights twinkling across the bay. So much had changed between them. Years of hurt and misunderstanding replaced by a deep, quiet respect and a friendship forged in the fires of shared purpose. They weren't the same people who had once fallen in love, but in some ways their bond was stronger now than ever. "Have you heard from Isabel?" Elena asked softly. Dominic nodded, his gaze fixed on the water. "She's in Singapore now, doing well, apparently. She even started her own ethical fashion brand." Elena raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Really? That's unexpected." "People surprise you," Dominic replied with a wry smile. "I think in her own way she's trying to make things right." As they turned to rejoin the party, Elena caught sight of a young woman across the room, vibrant and animated in conversation with a group of tech leaders. She nudged Dominic and nodded toward her. "Isn't that Zoe Chen? Lily's niece?" Dominic squinted, then nodded. "I think you're right. Lily said she was interning this summer. Bright kid, apparently." Elena watched Zoe for a moment, struck by the energy in her voice. Even seasoned professionals were listening intently to what she had to say. "She reminds me of us," she said. "Back when we really believed we could change the world." Dominic chuckled. "Well, we did. Just not the way we imagined." As they mingled once more with the summit's attendees, shaking hands, exchanging stories, and planting seeds for future collaborations, Elena's thoughts turned to what lay ahead. The Callahan-Ashford initiative had already reshaped Pacific Shore and influenced business practices around the globe. But there was still so much to do, so many systems still entrenched in the old way of thinking. She thought of Gerald Callahan, his flaws, his manipulations, and his ultimately transformative legacy. There were still days when she wrestled with the moral ambiguity of what he had done, but she couldn't deny the result. A movement, a reformation, a second chance for her and for so many others. Later, as the celebration wound down, Elena found herself once more on the balcony, this time alone. She gazed over the city, the skyline a testament to progress, the distant waves a reminder of all that was still vulnerable. The lessons of the past 5 years played through her mind, the necessity of integrity, even when it costs dearly, the value of redemption. The truth that systemic change often demands bold, even painful action. And perhaps most importantly, that no one changes the world alone. It takes partnership, collaboration, a willingness to listen, to forgive, to grow, even with those once seen as adversaries. As Elena turned to head inside, her eyes landed on a bronze plaque newly affixed to the wall, part of the convention center's renovation. She walked over and read the inscription. "The arc of progress is bent by those who dare to lead, not with power, but with purpose." Elena smiled softly, the words settling deep within her. It was a reminder, a promise, and a call to continue. The story of Elena Callahan and Dominic Ashford wasn't finished. The next chapter still waited to be written. And as long as they walked forward, together, they knew they'd keep bending that arc, one honest step at a time. "The true measure of a person's success," the plaque read, "is not in the wealth they accumulate, but in the positive impact they leave on the world and the lives they touch along the way." The quote, attributed to Gerald Callahan, made Elena smile softly as she traced the engraved letters with her fingertips. It was her father's last lesson, perhaps the most profound one of all. She stood there for a moment longer, letting the words settle in her heart before turning to rejoin the celebration. As she stepped back into the warm light of the convention center, surrounded by supporters, innovators, and friends, Elena felt a deep sense of peace. The past, with all its pain and complexity, could not be changed, but the future? That was still being written. And every choice she and Dominic made, every person who joined their cause, was helping to pen a new story. A story of ethical leadership, of environmental stewardship, of redemption earned through action and courage. The Callahan-Ashford initiative was no longer just a foundation. It had become a movement, a force for systemic change in a world that desperately needed bold, visionary solutions. And as Elena looked around at the faces of those committed to carrying this mission forward, she knew in her bones, their work was far from finished. In the end, it had never been about money, or influence, or legacy in the traditional sense. It had always been about one thing: leaving the world better than they found it. And in that, Alina knew they had already succeeded far beyond what she'd once believed possible. As the evening came to a close and the last guests trickled out, Elena and Dominic stood by the doors, exchanging farewells. The salty breeze from the nearby harbor carried the scent of the sea, a quiet reminder of the delicate balance they had vowed to protect, between growth and responsibility, ambition and sustainability. "Ready for another 5 years?" Dominic asked, his tone light, that familiar spark of competition in his eyes. Elena laughed, linking her arm through his. "Make it 10, we're just getting started." They walked toward their waiting car, the skyline of Pacific Shore glowing around them like a constellation of fallen stars. Elena felt a surge of hope and excitement. The journey of the Callahan-Ashford initiative was far from over. In many ways, it was only beginning, and whatever came next, she and Dominic would face it together. Partners, in business, in purpose, in the never-ending quest to make the world better, one decision at a time. So the story has come to an end, hasn't it? And yet, here you are, still with us. That tells me something real has touched your heart in one way or another. Maybe it was Elena's quiet strength, or Dominic's battle between ambition and redemption. Whatever it was, it reached you. And now let's take a step back. Not to judge, but to reflect. Not in terms of right or wrong, but in understanding the deeper current of the story. What does it mean to truly inherit something? Wealth, power, a legacy. This story reminds us that the real inheritance is not in money, but in the responsibility to shape the future with integrity. Harrison Bellamy didn't just leave a fortune, he left a challenge. And whether we're running corporations or simply navigating our own lives, we all face that same challenge every day. Who do we choose to be? In the words of Marcus Aurelius, a Stoic philosopher, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. Elena and Dominic's journey mirrors that call, to rise above ego, to move beyond the shadows of betrayal and bitterness, and to build something that lasts beyond ourselves. We all carry wounds. Some we show, many we don't. But like Elena, we can choose to transform pain into purpose. Like Dominic, we can confront our past and dare to change. Healing isn't linear, and redemption doesn't come easy. But as this story shows, it is always possible. So if you're still watching, still feeling, still thinking, thank you. That means something here resonated with you. Don't keep that to yourself. Share this video with someone who might need it. Like it if it sparked even a flicker of hope. And subscribe if you want more stories that don't just entertain, but speak to the soul. Because the truth is, we're all writing our own legacies. One decision, one action, one change at a time.